The Thing That Screamed in the Night by Grover Brown.
Chapter 1. The light from the sun faded slowly and darkness enveloped the small homestead like a veil. The old man sat beside the fireplace and read by the coal oil lamp. Several hounds sat lazily by the fire and nodded. It was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, and even though the cotton crop was long since harvested, and the time of work from daylight until dark had passed, there had still been much work to fill the short days. There was livestock to feed and wood to cut, as well as brush piles to move. However, this relatively slow time of year would quickly pass. The boy had spent the day watching his father and his uncles baling hay. The hay baler sat in the middle of the field. It was the kind that was horse-drawn, and had a tongue and a lead pole. The old mule named Emma was pulling the baler, and the boy's father's black mare was dragging the shocks of hay from the field up to the baler. His uncle was using a pitchfork to throw the hay shocks into the top of the baler, and his father and Uncle Will were loading the finished bales onto the wagon. The bales of hay would be transported to the barn and stacked in the loft for winter feed. It was late in the year, and this would be the last of the hay. As he sat, he was playing with the horses and soldiers that his grandfather had made for him from stalks of corn. The horses were made from short pieces of the large part of the corn stalk, and the outside of the stalk was split to form the legs and the neck. The horses' heads were made from the smaller top of the stalk. The ears were made from splits of the outside of the stalk, and the horses' tails were made from the corn silk. The men were made in similar fashion. He loved playing with his imaginary armies. During a lull in one of his battles, he was lying on his back and gazing up at the sky. Suddenly a black shape appeared. He recognized it immediately as a crow, and as he watched it, he realized that it was carrying something in its beak, something shining brightly as the sun reflected off of it. As the crow swooped down toward the boy, it dropped the object right on the boy's chest. He picked it up and held it in his hand. It was a beautiful necklace, handmade from hammered silver, and attached to the chain was an arrowhead. Ironically, the arrowhead was a bird point with a perfectly drilled hole in the tip, not through the flat side as one would expect, but through the sharp side. Bird points differ from other types of arrowheads because they do not have the extra appendage on the end, which would be attached to the arrow shaft, but instead are shaped into simple triangles. It would be nearly impossible to drill such a point without breaking the flint, yet here it was, shining in the light. The arrowhead was as black as the crow which had dropped it. Even at his age, the boy was not surprised to see a crow with a shiny object. He knew the nature of the crows, and was aware of their attraction to shiny objects. Once while hunting with his father, he had found a stash of old pieces of tin foil and coins, and such that had been gathered by crows. He also understood the intelligence of the species. He had witnessed their behavior many times, while watching the interaction between them and the other creatures around them. He knew that they always posted a watch whenever they fed, and he had seen them work as teams to steal the young of other less intelligent birds. He took the necklace to his father and asked him about it. "Looks like something the Cherokees made," said his father. Christian asked, "Can I keep it?" His father replied, "I reckon so. They have been gone from this place for over a century. I doubt they will miss it." The boy thanked his father and pondered where and how he had come to receive such a gift. He knew that it had to be a gift, because he had never seen a crow be clumsy enough to drop something by accident. At the end of the day and after supper, the boy went to the side porch near the well, and dragged out his footstool, pushed it near the shelf at the side of the porch where the water bucket sat. He took the dipper from the bucket and drank, then walked to the living room where his grandfather sat near the fire. The old man heard his grandson enter the room. The boy loved spending the night with his grandparents. His grandmother Rosetta always had some treat for him. Most of the time, it would be a piece of candy. Sometimes it would be a baked apple, but she always had something, and his grandfather often told him stories. The boy looked at the old man and said, "Papa, tell me a story?" "How about I tell you a story that will help you?" The boy agreed and sat listening intently as the story unfolded. The old man began, "You remember how I have warned you about the dangers of wandering in the swamp? Well, let me tell you about the creatures and how you can learn from them. All God's creatures are the same. They possess wisdom which comes to them naturally, yet they too learn from experiences which are both natural, and which they have to be learned. The young always learn from the old. Let me give you an example. You know that when you wander in the swamp there are many dangers. Some of them are obvious and some of them are not. One of the elusive dangers is the depth of the water. Listen and the frogs will give you advice, but remember not to listen to the young ones. They do not have the experience. You listen to the older frogs, and they will tell you the right way. The boy was confused. He looked at his grandfather and said, "Papa, I do not understand." The old man explained, "See, the young frogs will say, knee deep, knee deep, knee deep, knee deep. Listen to the old frogs when they say, you better go back, you better go back, you better go back." Then the boy understood the lesson of the frogs, because his grandfather had imitated the young frogs in a high-pitched voice, and the old frogs in a lower pitch, sounding very much like their familiar song. He had heard them sing many times before. The boy thanked his grandfather for the story and started off to bed. He wiggled between the pile of patchwork quilts and the feather-filled mattress for the night. While the boy was safe and warm in the bed, across on the other side of the swamp at the Portavine house, the creature sat alone and gazed into the night. There was no moon tonight, but when there was, the house, which was surrounded by live oak trees draped with Spanish moss and covered with vines from years of neglect, was clearly visible in the eerie glow. It had been the home of Sally Portavine until her death some years ago. The moss and the overhanging limbs gave the appearance of old gray-bearded men embracing the house with bony arms. The creature had seen the boy before and pondered the encounter. A crow rested on her shoulder as the creature sang her song in the darkness. Where the boy lay at his grandparents' house, there were no outside lights of any kind. So when it was time to go to bed, there was only pitch-black darkness in the house, especially on clouded nights or nights with no moon. In summer, he could hear all sorts of sounds in the night, because the windows would have been opened. This was not summer, and the only heat in the house was a fireplace. The hounds were turned out to the yard, and the ashes had been banked for the night. In the morning, the house would be very cold, and the ashes in the fireplace would have to be poked, and a fresh log would be placed on the fire, but for now it was time to go to bed. The boy was thinking of the lesson of the frogs, and about his own bed at his parents' house. That house was newer, but was still very modest by today's standards. He had been born at that house. He knew that his mother had the luxury of a doctor. Old Dr. Hamilton had made it to the house before the boy had arrived. His two sisters were older, and he did not know if his mother had the same luxury when they arrived. The house was built by the sweat of his father's brow. Oh, he had some help from the boy's grandfather and from his mother's brothers, but with no electricity, each board and each support had to be sawed with a handsaw, and each nail driven by hand. He was almost asleep when he heard it. What he heard through the closed windows, and at some distance coming from the swamp, was a haunting melody, one he knew he had never heard before, yet it seemed somehow familiar. Was it his imagination? Perhaps it was, because the sound was a very faint, almost haunting sort of echo. He listened closely in the darkness, and the darkness was so deep, it would have been impossible for him to see even his hand in front of his face. It was the kind of darkness which turned the mind into an artist's palette with the imagination as its brush. He was used to hearing the normal night sounds in summer, fall and spring, but winter nights were mostly quiet, except for the occasional barn owl or maybe a screech owl. These sounds he knew even at an early age. He tried to place where he had heard this sound, or even one like it. Then it came to him. It had been a few years ago when he had been at the edge of the woods with his older cousins. They had been pulling him in a homemade wagon, when a pack of wolves had appeared from the edge of the swamp. His cousins had been so terrified that they had run away, and left him sitting in the wagon. His mother had been behind the house washing clothes in a washtub with a scrub board. When she saw the cousins running, she looked for the boy. She saw him sitting in the wagon and the wolves were very close, just sitting quietly and watching the boy. Not only were the wolves transfixed on the boy, and focused in the direction of the swamp, but they also had heard the voice. It was singing, but in a whisper in the same voice that he had heard tonight. It reminded him of the songs he had heard at the camp meeting, but very different. The voice from the swamp had whispered, "I will sing to your heart a sweet melody. You know I will sing it just for thee." The wolves turned, and then slowly returned to the safety of the wilderness, which surrounded the house like the embracing arms of a loving family. His mother had run and grabbed him in her arms, thinking that her scream had frightened the wolves. The boy lay awake that night remembering, and finally drifted off to sleep. As soon as he awoke the next morning, he ran to ask his grandfather what could have made such a sound. "Papa," the boy said, "I heard a strange sound last night." His grandfather replied, "I heard it too. It was the thing that screams in the night." "Why do they say that it screams?" asked the boy. "What did it sound like to you, Christian?" He called him by his full first name, when he wanted to be serious. Most everyone else just called him Chris. His full name was Christian Lathan Baggett. Christian said, "It sounded like a woman singing the most beautiful song I've ever heard. You know, like the songs at the camp meeting when the women sing aka, aka." His grandfather laughed and said, "You mean a cappella?" Christian said, "Yes. You know, without music." "I know one thing," said the old man. "You have a hell of an imagination." Of course it was his imagination. Isn't that where all mystical creatures and spirits live? Christian, as he always did when he did not get a satisfactory answer, went to ask the same question to a different person. Christian found his grandmother out on the front porch. She had just finished churning butter. He said, "Mama, I heard a woman singing in the night. She reminded me of the beautiful voices that I hear at camp meeting." His grandmother responded, "It had to happen, child. Sit down there and let me tell you a secret. I will tell you the story in the same way that my mother told it to me. The family moved west to Normandy, just across the English Channel. They were knights and served under William the Conqueror when he invaded England, and took the throne at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. When the battle was over and darkness fell, a scream broke the stillness of the night. Many wondered at the sound, but no one spoke of it. The creature followed our family across the Atlantic many generations later. It was heard on the night of the ship's landing in Virginia in 1673. It was also heard the night your great-grandfather 6 generations ago left to fight in the American Revolution. His grandson heard it the night he died at Vicksburg during the Great Civil War, and his son heard it the night he left his home in Georgia to settle his family in Alabama. His son, your grandfather, first heard it when he moved to this place many years ago. Now you have heard the thing that screams in the night, but only a few hear the song." Christian was spellbound at the words he had heard, but at the same time, he was burning with a strange curiosity. He was curious about many things, but this was oddly different. Now he had to know everything about this creature. If it was a creature, what if it was some type of spirit? How could it not be a spirit? No living creature could have survived for over 1,000 years. He questioned his grandmother further, "Has anyone seen this thing?" She replied, "Oh yes, I myself have seen it, but only for a second or two. I was a young girl and was in the field picking cotton with the rest of the family, when we heard the baying of the hounds. They were on a hot trail and were in full cry." Christian knew what she meant because he had been with his father, grandfather and uncles when they took the hounds to the woods at night to catch raccoons and possums. Usually it would be cool and damp at night. Christian's father and uncles would journey to a selected spot and release the hounds. Typically they would have them housed in the dog box on the back of the truck, unless of course they were hunting near the house. As soon as the tailgate dropped and the box was opened, the hounds would shoot out like race horses from the starting gate. Then the men would sit, wait, and listen. The dogs would run about with their noses to the ground in search of the scent of the quarry. When a scent was struck, you would hear whining, and as the scent got stronger, other dogs would join in. What followed can only be described as a chorus in perfect harmony. By and by the dogs would get closer and closer to the prey. As they did, the singing baying would increase until they were in full cry. Eventually the baying would evolve into steady rapid barks. That meant that the quarry had left the ground and climbed a tree. The hounds were treed and awaiting our arrival. Sometimes they could be a half a mile away. Christian asked, "Were the hounds very close, Mama?" "Yes, they were close behind the thing. It ran right past me. I say ran, but really it looked more like it was gliding across the ground, standing erect, and while I could hear the sounds of the dog's feet as they ran after it, I could hear no sound that it made." "What did it look like?" asked the boy. "It was as white as snow, and had a mark between its eyes. The mark was as black as coal, and was in the shape of a triangle with the tip pointed downward." Grandmother Rosetta looked intently at her grandson and said, "I was scared to death. I asked my mother and she told me the story that I just told to you. There was one other time that the creature made its presence known. It happened when your mother was a child. She was playing in the floor of the old house where we lived before. It was summertime, and all the doors and windows were open. In those days we did not have screens on the windows or screen doors. Any animal could just walk in. All of a sudden a large dog ran in through the open back door. I screamed, and your mother had to run and jump on top of the bed to escape. The dog was growling and leaping around. It was snapping at anything and everything in its path. I grabbed the broom and tried to chase it from the house. It paid no attention to me, but staggered out into the front yard. Your grandfather was at the wood pile and heard us screaming. He shot the dog, and it fell in the yard. He came to the house to see if we were okay. Unbeknownst to him, several cats had come up to the dog to investigate. The cats wandered off, and sat gazing at the scene. Your grandfather went out and picked up the carcass and took it to the brush pile and burned it. We thought no more about the rabid dog until 9 weeks had passed. Then one evening just about dark, your grandfather returned from the field, and was putting the mules in the barn. He heard the barn cats yowling. There were 9 of them. They stayed in the barn, and kept the rat population under control. Before he could even think, the cats were jumping at him and the mules. Then from the field at the side of the barn, he heard it. It was the thing that screamed in the night. As soon as the cats heard the scream, they ran for the swamp, never to be seen again. Why in the world would the cats go crazy like that? Christian asked. His grandmother replied, we wondered that same thing. The only thing we could think of was that the cats must have lapped the blood of the mad dog. Wow, Papa could have been bitten, said Christian. His grandmother replied, it surely would have been terrible to have been trapped in a dark barn with 9 rabid cats. They could have spread the disease to him and the mules as well, if the creature had not intervened. Will I ever see the thing? Asked the boy. His grandmother replied, I have a feeling you will. Christian asked, why did I not hear a scream, but instead heard a beautiful melody? His grandmother replied, that I do not know. Then Christian recalled something that he had either forgotten, or had inadvertently pushed to the back recesses of his memory. One of the places where they had hunted was the Portavine house. It had been abandoned for many years. It was where Miss Sally Portavine had spent the remaining years of her life. She had left the bayous of South Louisiana as a young woman. She never talked to anyone about her past. When they hunted at Miss Sally's place, Christian had listened intently as the men talked about Miss Sally's pet. The men said that they had visited the spot many times throughout the years because of a creature known only as Miss Sally's pet. They speculated as to the actual nature of this creature, if indeed it was a creature. Some said that it was a very old raccoon which lived in the live oak. Others claimed it was a bobcat. Whatever it was always there and was never seen. Even though they had never actually laid eyes on the creature even on moonlit nights, they knew it was there because as soon as they released the hounds, they would strike its track and the chase was on. Since the thing had a scent, they assumed that it was some type of animal as opposed to being a spirit. They had described a typical night's adventure as consisting of releasing the hounds, striking of the track and a lengthy chase through the surrounding cypress pond. The chase could last as long as a couple of hours and cover 3 or 4 miles. It always ended in the same fashion. It would end where it had begun, at Miss Sally's house where the trail and scent would be lost. They said, there seemed to be a ghostly presence in the house. The house was always several degrees colder than the outside temperature. Even on very cold nights when they built a fire in the fireplace, it never really got much warmer in the room. If Miss Sally's spirit still exists, perhaps her pet was just teasing the packs of hounds for its own amusement. Christian fell asleep in his own bed that night thinking about the events of the day and the memories which had emerged. Chapter 2. This place called Ball Play was located in the foothills of the Appalachians, and was named after the game, which the Native Americans had played for centuries. The month was July in the year 1691. The players from Turkeytown and Rabbit Town had gathered here for a game. The young Cherokee boy called Zani was excited. It would be his first real game. Zani went around to the various tents and shelters, which contained the prizes which would be awarded to the victors. There was jewelry, pottery and many items made from skins of various animals. In one tent he saw the most beautiful necklace he had ever seen. It was made of hammered silver, and supported a perfect black bird point. He dreamed of someday winning one for himself. Suddenly he heard the commotion of the approaching teams. There was a loud cry from the team from Rabbit Town, which was promptly returned by Zani's group from Turkey Town. The cries continued as the two teams met in the center of the field. The field itself was marked by stakes, which had been driven into the ground, and marked off a square of about 100 yards. The players held in their hands long sticks with cups, not unlike spoons attached to the ends. This allowed for holding the ball, which was constructed of a wooden center wrapped tightly with deerskin. The chief from Turkey Town had been assigned the privilege of tossing the ball first, because Rabbit Town had won the last game the year before. The game began when the ball was tossed high in the air by the chief using his stick. The ball was caught by the chief from Rabbit Town, thereby winning them the first point. The teams again met in the center of the field. This time the ball was tossed by Chief Rabbit. The towns were named for their chiefs. Chief Turkey was unable to catch the ball. However, it was caught by one of his team. Now the real excitement began. Since the chief did not catch the ball, his team was required to move the ball across the other team's goal, without letting it touch the ground. The team member who had caught the ball made a mad dash for the goal line, but was tripped by one of the other team's players. The ball flew into the air, and was caught by a member of the Turkey Town team, who made a dash for the goal. He managed to hit one of the other team's players in the head with the stick without dropping the ball. Most of the other players from both teams were actively engaged in something akin to combat in pursuit of their goals. The game lasted until no one from either team was willing or able to continue. The score was Turkey Town 10 and Rabbit Town 7. Zani wondered if the prayers and rituals from the elders had helped gain the victory. He had watched intently as they sang to the beat of the drums and tossed their stones, roots and bones, in an effort to effect a win for their teams. The tall young man who had scored the most points selected the beautiful necklace as his prize. Several generations later his descendant would be lucky enough to avoid the great exodus we know as the Trail of Tears and remain in this place. His name is Will. Chapter 3. The following day was one which Christian always looked forward to. It was the one day a month when he got to go to town. Morgan's store was on the main street in Piedmont and belonged to the Morgan brothers, Norris, Earl and Harry. They all worked in the store. Christian remembered Harry always had a cigar in his mouth. He could never tell it was ever lit. Morgan's store was laid out in the standard fashion of the day, with a small bay-type window to the left of the door. Most of the time, bananas and other types of produce would be displayed here, hanging upside down from the ceiling. The store building itself was much longer than it was wide, and was divided into two parts. The right side of the store was the public side, and was divided by a long counter on the right, and rows of shelves containing various canned goods on the left. There was a section of shelves in the rear on the left-hand side, which held flour and sacks which could be used as dressmaking material, when the flour had been taken home, and emptied into the bin for later use. The meat case was in the very back of the store. Most likely this dated back to an earlier age, when animals may have been slaughtered behind the store. There was a large butcher block where chickens and pork chops were cut to order. Bologna was cut to order using a large knife. Behind the counter in the front of the store were shelves from counter level, all the way to the top of the 10-foot ceiling. This is where items were stored which were not in everyday demand, or were tempting to desperate souls who might think that they deserved a box of snuff or a plug of tobacco, even if they happened to be broke at the time. Also behind this counter, beside the cash register, was a wooden box, which looked as if it were custom made to hold ticket books, which were standing vertically and stored in rows back to front. Penciled on the top of each book was a name. The name of the person who owed money for the items listed in the book. When a customer didn't have cash, which was most of the time, they would select the items they needed and bring them to the counter. The storekeeper would either list them individually in the book, or tally them and write in the amount and the date. There were wooden floors throughout the store, but the floors in the left side warehouse area were marked by grooves, which were left by the metal spoke wheels of the flatbed buggies, which were loaded and unloaded daily. One of Christian's favorite things to do when he went to Morgan's was to sneak into the left side of the store, because it was much more interesting to a boy. It was filled with the aromas of cornmeal, coffee, sugar, animal feed, and a few unidentifiable smells, some pleasant, some not so pleasant, but still interesting. Although these were interesting, they were not his main motivation for sneaking in there. He was interested in locating one of the most important employees, the big bob-tailed cat which made his living by decimating the rat population. By and by he found the cat and roused him from his sleep. It had taken him a while to get the old cat comfortable enough to be touched, but the cat eventually warmed up to Christian, or at least to tolerate his presence. This time was different. The old cat came over to the boy and stared directly into his eyes. Christian heard a strange voice. It was coming from the cat, yet the cat made no audible sound. The boy was hearing not through his ears, but in his head. The voice in Christian's head simply said, "Listen to the crows." That was all the old cat had to say. Eventually, the boy wandered back into the main part of the store. Then something else happened that Christian would never forget. Christian's father was talking to one of the storekeepers, when a little girl approached the store. She was pulling a child's wagon behind her, and in the wagon sat her little brother. As she and her little brother entered the store, Mr. Morgan asked her what he could do for her. The little girl said, "My mama needs these things, and can you please charge them to her account?" The little girl was referring to a list, which her mother had scribbled on an old paper bag. The list was not long and contained no luxuries, just simple staples necessary for survival. Mr. Morgan gathered the items and placed them in a couple of old recycled cardboard boxes, and loaded them in the wagon. Christian watched as the children departed. He couldn't help notice that a crow was flying low just above and alongside of the wagon. When the children had departed, Christian's father asked Mr. Morgan if he had forgotten to write the items in the book. The old man smiled and said, "No, I did not forget. It would not do any good to write them down. Those children have no daddy and their mama has no money." Hearing and seeing the compassion that day made a lasting impression on the boy. He began to understand the meaning of community. Until today he had been centered on family. Now he understood that family should extend past relatives and include all people. He would never forget the lesson. It was dark by the time the family returned to the homestead and bedtime came early. Christian lay in bed torn between feelings of desire to hear the voice again yet frightened by the prospect. Deep inside he felt a connection to the creature. A connection which seemed to transcend both time and space. Chapter 4. The school year was divided by harvest time. The students would return to school on September 1st, but would get 2 weeks off when the cotton crop was ready to harvest a few weeks later. So, Christian's life was typical. He spent his time going to school, helping on the homestead, hunting, fishing, and wandering in the woods. He finished school and did odd jobs. He hired out to other people in the area, doing whatever he could to make a living. He was still living at home, and did not require a lot of money. He also played music with a small group at local venues. Sometimes they would be paid a flat rate, and sometimes they would get a percentage of the ticket sales. All of the years spent gazing out the windows at school seemed to help with Christian's songwriting. At least they were good for something. In addition, he had finally caught up with the rest of his age group in physical size. Now he was 6 feet tall, but very slim. He recalled his first day in school. He was very small for his age, and was bullied by many of his classmates. The little school was very modest, but seemed to match the tattered group of country children in their overalls and bare feet. A trend began with first grade. No matter how far the teacher moved Christian's desk away from the windows, he always managed to gaze out and daydream. It was so much more interesting than the school work. As the years passed, he managed to at least make it to the next grades on time. Each summer when his chores were finished, he would spend his time romping in the woods accompanied by his dog. Bonzo was a squirrel dog, a terrier mix. Aside from his squirrel hunting abilities, he was a good rat catcher and snake killer. He was quick enough to grab a poisonous snake and shake it violently until it was quite dead. He had many fond memories of his childhood. Nowadays, Homestead had become modernized to some extent. The family had a tractor, and the mules were mostly retired and put out to pasture. The old mule Emma was in her late 30s, and would not be around much longer. When Christian was around 12 or so, he had learned to drive the tractor. He enjoyed cutting hay, and would always start mowing around the perimeter of the field. As he mowed, any creatures such as mice, rats, or snakes would move to the center of the field. As the tractor got closer and the patch of grass in the center got smaller, the creatures which were trapped in the center would try to make a break for the woods. This decision was sometimes a good one, and they would make it to the woods. However, most times, they would have to try to outrun Bonzo. He would sit, watch, and wait. At the first sight of movement, he was quickly on the prey. He would intersect the path of the unsuspecting rodents or snakes, and hit them hard as he passed, flipping them into the air. If they were alive after that first bite, he would dispatch them with another carefully placed bite to the back of the neck. One day, there happened to be a hawk sitting in a tree near the field. The hawk and Bonzo saw the rat at the same time, and made a dash for it. Just as Bonzo was about to strike, the hawk, barely clearing the dog's head, snatched the rat and was off with its lunch, leaving Bonzo confused and disappointed. When the hay-cutting task was completed, there would be several small carcasses lying around. These would become a meal for the crows. During the next few years, many innovations had arrived in this part of Alabama. Thanks to the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, most everyone now had electricity. The TVA had built a series of hydroelectric dams, and this brought the electricity as well as many labor-saving devices, which had greatly improved the lives of the local people. Chapter 5. Christian had not heard the haunting sounds in the night since his childhood. He had heard the symphony of the frogs as well as the lonely call of the whip-poor-will singing, "Whip-poor-will, whip-poor-will." He even knew the difference between the whip-poor-will and the wee widow-will. He had heard the piercing cries of the screech owl and the ghostly hoot of the barn owl. In July he heard the rhythmic calls of the cicadas, the locals called July flies or katydids. He had been intoxicated by the perfume of Confederate jasmine drifting through the open windows in spring, and had awakened in the morning to the sight of the hummingbirds. Life was not easy, but it was good. Tomorrow started camp meeting, and Christian was eager to experience the annual 2-week event. The campground was not far, just down the road at Possum Trot. The people who settled this big beautiful green mountainous region of America were a fiercely independent lot. They came mostly from Western Europe, and brought the culture and the music without the conventions, which were imposed on them by the tyrannical rulers of their homelands. They endured many hardships, but as it is with hardships, the music always seemed to help. While the front porch was a good place for families to gather and pick fiddle and sing, the best place where Southern Appalachian music was created and performed was in church. Each summer people from all around would gather there for a couple of weeks, and sing and shout and praise the Lord. Chris was sure it started with a tent, but by the time he was born, the campground main tent called the tabernacle had been transformed from tent to a structure with a roof and completely open sides. The floor was just dirt with wood shavings from the sawmill scattered around. At one end there was a stage, and in the center front of the stage was a pulpit. To the left side was a choir, made up of both singers and musicians. There was a piano as well. In the center of the tabernacle were rows of benches. This is where the congregation sat. The women sat fanning themselves in the sweltering heat with fans, which were adorned with brightly colored images of Jesus and the angels. Outside the tabernacle off at some distance were rows of makeshift cabins. These were constructed by different members of the congregation, who only attended the camp meeting on an annual basis. There were also 2 dormitories which resembled barracks. There was one for the girls and one for the boys. This is not to say that girls and boys were required to stay there. They could stay in the cabin with their parents if they wished. As a boy, Christian spent as little time as possible inside the tabernacle, but but instead found it much more entertaining to wander around the perimeter and search for lost change. They had a snack shack down near the road. If he found enough lost change, he might get a soft drink or maybe an ice cream. For the past few years he had become more aware of the pretty girls from all over the southeast wandering around as well. Even though he was outside of the tabernacle, he could hear and see what was going on inside. The preaching never really grabbed hold of him, but the music definitely did. His father had tried to convince him that the mandolin ought to be his instrument, but he was sold on the harmonica. He was convinced that country music and the relatively new bluegrass as well evolved from gospel and blues. He knew that one of the greatest songwriters/singers of all time spent a lot of time singing gospel music. He knew the music of Hank Williams, who was also known as Luke the Drifter. Christian could not remember a time when Hank and his music had not been a part of his life. From his position, which at the moment was leaning against a tree just outside of the tabernacle, Christian could hear the choir singing, "Once I was lost and wandering in sin, I wouldn't let my dear Savior in, then like a blind man that God gave back his sight, praise the Lord, I saw the light." He was hoping to hear another one of his favorite songs, House of Gold, and it went like this: "I'd rather be in a deep dark grave, and know that my poor soul is saved than to live in this world, in a house of gold and deny my God and lose my soul." He thought, it just doesn't get any better than that. Hank had been gone from this world less than a decade. As the young man wandered closer to the tabernacle, he could hear and see a little better. He noticed something. The choir had started singing another song which featured the ladies. It was performed a cappella, and was one he had never heard. "Awake and sing, with praises strong in psalm and hymn and spirit song. Let love our words and works renew with all that's good and right and true. Then rise as children of the light. Be neither proud, nor hide from sight. Be careful how you live, and wise to sift the truth from cunning lies." In the front center stage stood a young lady, dressed all in white, and around her neck hung a necklace of silver. A piece of onyx in the shape of a triangle, black as the darkest night, hung from the necklace. It reminded him very much of the arrowhead necklace which was about his neck. The girl was about Christian's age, and she sang with the voice of an angel. Then he realized that everyone but him seemed to be unaware of her presence, and that her gaze was locked on him, as if he were the only person in the universe. She seemed to glow. Was this his imagination? Of course it was, but that did not make her less real. Her lips stopped moving, and it seemed as if the entire world was in some kind of suspended animation, or at least in a different realm of reality. As she looked at Christian, he could hear her whispering to him, not in an audible voice, but in his head. In that same voice from his early childhood she sang, "I will sing to your heart a sweet melody, you will know that I sing it just for thee. By and by, and it won't be long, we will be joined in our own moon song." As suddenly as this odd experience had begun, it had ended with the rest of the song as the young lady, or whatever she was, slowly vanished before his eyes. He called out, "Please wait. Wait for me. Do not leave me." At this, the deacons descended from the stage and escorted the boy in so he could receive the prayers of the entire congregation. They were not sure what kind of affliction he had, but they were sure that prayer and the laying on of hands could fix it. What could he do? He had to accept their good intentions, but he knew that the experience was neither a figment of his imagination, nor an unexplained evil which required all this prayer. He was certain of only one thing: whomever or whatever this thing was, it was not only connected in this life, but had always been and would always be together. Chapter 6. He did not know how he had made it another year without her. Despite his feelings that summer afternoon at the camp meeting, and everything he had felt, and everything he had seen, he did not know for sure if he would ever see her again. That is what he felt. That is not what he thought. What he thought was as vivid as it had been that day. This creature, whatever it was, had been with him always, and would be with him forever, but how much longer would he have to wait? Was her heart so cold that she could toy with him for years? Was she some sort of demon sent to torment him for some unknown mortal sin or family curse? It did not seem that way. He thought about what the Creator must have been thinking when he made this beautiful creature, and pondered the mystery of creativity as he thought about the master craftsman who had designed and created the beautiful necklace which still hung on his neck, where it had remained since the crow had given it to him long ago. He thought about the necklace which hung about the young lady's neck, and the one which hung about his own neck. Could it be coincidence? He thought not. Then he began to think about how grateful he was for the circumstances of his youth. When he was very small, he did not have toys like children play with today. He remembered the homemade toys of his youth. The horses and men made from cornstalks, and how he loved playing with those disposable armies. He could stage many battles and not worry about losses. One day when he was very young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, his mother had given him some clay to play with. He immediately started to model likenesses of animals and people. He had not learned this. It was with him from the beginning. He knew this because of his ability to create these things without the use of his conscious mind. He had always had the ability to form the clay figures with his eyes closed. He believed that all creativity flowed from the Creator, the one who formed the universe. Was the beautiful young lady just another of his, Christian's, own creations? God, he hoped not. How could he find out? Then he remembered. Hattie Beavis, Uncle Will's wife. Of course, why had he not thought of her before? Uncle Will was not really his uncle. That was just what everyone called him. Christian could not remember when Uncle Will was not around. He was always there helping out around the homestead. He and his wife Hattie lived in one of the older houses on the big farm down the road. Their house was easy to spot even at twilight, because of its most striking feature. The front door was painted bright blue, with a larger than normal heavy glass window in the center. Once when Christian was little, he thought he saw an image. He could not make out the features, but it seemed to be infused into the glass. Then it faded into the darkness. Christian headed down Dillard Road to Uncle Will's place. As he walked, he thought about this place where he was born, and where he had grown up. He was almost an adult, and in fact he had already experienced much more than a normal kid his age. He had always asked questions, a lot of questions to anyone and everyone who would listen. He once asked his father why they called this particular road the Dillard Road. His father had told him that when he himself had been a young man, he had worked for a logging company. They had decided to quit for the day and had felled a tree. It was lying across a narrow path. They decided to leave it there and start the next day, by cutting the limbs off of that tree first. When they arrived for work early the next morning, an old gray-haired man wearing faded overalls and a ragged fedora was sitting on the felled tree, and holding an ancient shotgun in his arms. He said, "Y'all dropped a tree on my road. Get it off." That old man was Dillard White. Christian's father obliged him and removed the tree. The old man's bark had been worse than his bite, and come lunchtime, he had invited Christian's father to eat at his house. The house lay some distance down the path, and Dillard's wife had lunch on the old wood stove. Dillard said, "Are you hungry, boy?" Christian's father replied that he was in fact starving. That was a statement he would soon regret. Dillard turned to his wife and said, "Honey, show the boy what's in the pot." She lifted the lid of the old black cast iron pot, to reveal the grinning face of a possum carcass protruding from the boiling, crackling cauldron. It was too late to back down, and Christian's father had been forced to join them for lunch. So from that time on, this road had been called Dillard Road, and from that time on Christian appreciated his mother's meals and never complained. Christian wandered on down the road until he reached Uncle Will's and Hattie's place. He stopped at the front porch and hollered, "Anybody in the house?" Hattie came to the door and greeted the boy with, "My goodness gracious, look what the cat drug in. I've been expecting you, boy." There was good reason for Hattie to be expecting Christian, and it had nothing to do with any time schedule or routine. It was Holy Thursday, the day when Jesus had suffered in the garden. It was the day before Good Friday, a day which preceded great human suffering, but also great salvation. It was a chilly March day, and Hattie was sitting beside the fireplace. Her little dog was snoozing in the front of the house. The house itself was what is called a shotgun house. What that meant was that you could stand at the front porch and fire a shotgun blast through the house, and out the back door without hitting a wall. Many houses built during that time period were in the same fashion. This design had a couple of distinct qualities, one being that the house was usually built on pillars, and was quite unstable. Many older people had described this quality by saying, a cat could walk through and shake the whole house. The second quality was that sounds carried extremely well. It was this second quality which allowed Hattie to clearly hear the thud. As I said, she was sitting quietly when the thing hit the door. The dog was roused from his sleep, sprang to his feet, and let out a series of barks. Hattie rushed to the door and looked through the glass. She saw nothing, so she opened the door, only to find a mourning dove, lying on its back on the front porch. The dove's lifeless eyes seemed to be gazing upwards. It was not such a rare thing, a bird crashing into a glass. Hattie had witnessed it many times in her lifetime. It was what she noticed next that was quite strange. There on the door glass was an imprint. Understand that it was not a stain, for the dove had not lost any blood or feathers in the impact. On the contrary, the dove was without blemish. The imprint on the glass was a perfect likeness of the bird. It looked as if someone had drawn it in great detail with a piece of white chalk. The feathers, beak, head, breast, and wings were visible in great detail. Hattie thought about the Shroud of Turin, and how the image of Christ seemed to be transferred to the cloth by some extraordinary light source. She thought about the meaning of this strange phenomenon. As she wondered, she considered the hidden meanings. Could this be related to the Spirit which descended in the form of a dove at the baptism of Christ? How did it relate to the Passover feast when the Jews put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts, so the angel of death would pass over them? Since the dove represents peace, could this be an omen predicting a coming war? How did this relate to the recent screams she had heard in the night? Were the screams somehow related to the voice crying in the wilderness? She decided that it would be prudent to prepare a mojo hand. She gathered the necessary ingredients consisting of lightning water, violet leaves, frankincense, myrrh, and other secret items unknown to the average person. She carefully prepared them using a process which had been used for eons by her ancestors. She then placed them in a tiny red velvet pouch. Hattie was thinking of these things when she answered the door. Christian, standing at the front door, said, "You've been expecting me." "Well, of course I have. I saw it in my mirror this morning. I knew that a great change was in the wind. I just wasn't sure what it all meant. That is up till now," she thought. Hattie could see and do things that other people could not. She could place a candle in front of a mirror and see visions. She could talk off warts, meaning if someone in the area had a wart, they would come to see Hattie, and for a small fee, she would whisper some type of incantation and cause the wart to drop off, or if you had a sty in one of your eyes, she could prepare a mojo for you. She would instruct you to take the mojo to the front porch and wait for a passerby to come. Just as they were passing the house, you would repeat a chant and throw the mojo toward the road. The sty would then be passed to the passerby. Christian said to Hattie, "Miss Hattie, I have many questions and no money." Hattie said, "Child, you don't need no money here. You know how we is together. Now sit down there and tell old Hattie what's on your mind." Christian started at the beginning and told Hattie about the wolves, the crow, the song, and the camp meeting. Old Hattie lit up her pipe and sat rocking in her chair, and puffing for what seemed to Christian was forever, all the while thinking, "Oh, so dat what de dove mean? Big change in de world comin' now." Then she spoke. "My peoples come from Africa and practiced what you call voodoo. Your peoples comes from Europe and practiced witchcraft. Uncle Will's peoples was here in this swamp long before any of us, and they had what they called shamans. We all mingled up together now and uses some of all of it. We calls that hoodoo." "What does it all mean to me, Hattie?" asked the young man. She took another puff from her pipe and began, "Time seems to us mortals to be a straight line, which moves from past to present to future. Think of it as a road. As you travel down life's road, you have choices to make. Think of the choices as forming a cross. You can simply continue on your way straight ahead, or you can turn to the left, or to the right, or even turn around and go back the way you came." Christian looked at her and said, "Well, that is as clear as mud." The old lady reared back in her chair, and let out a cackle that would put the best hen to shame. "You is one funny boy," she said. "You gots to think wid your head and your heart, and I means the head what rests on yo' shoulders. Ha 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 ha." "I love you, Hattie," said the boy. "I loves you too, boy. Just do what I said, and it will come into focus. What you gots to do is find the connection to all the ways together. Make the straight way into a circle. Just go on now and don't come back until you are really lost, and as for the rest of it you gots ta ax her dem questions. Christian, more confused than ever, asked, how on earth am I going to do that, Hattie? The old lady smiled, took another draw from the pipe and said, you does it just like old Will does his cooking, low and slow. Boy, before you leave take this with you. It is the strongest magic I can give you. Hattie handed the boy a small red cloth bag and said, it's a mojo, boy. Christian replied, okay, Hattie. Chapter 7. Christian was on his way back from Will and Hattie's place when he met Uncle Will on his way home. The old man smiled a big smile and greeted Christian. Hey boy, where you been? Christian replied, I was talking to Hattie. Uncle Will commented, you done better than me, I can't talk to that old hag much myself. You look like you got a lot on your mind. The boy pondered that for a second, smiled, and said, Uncle Will, I had a strange thing happen to me a long time ago. I was lying out in the field and looking up at the sky, when a crow swooped down out of the sky, and dropped this necklace right on my chest. Reaching out and taking the arrowhead in his hand, the old man said, let me take a look at that thing. Boy, this has great powers. My people have many beliefs which they only share with a few people who live outside of our world. Let me tell you what we believe. We believe that most people who live outside our realm are blind and deaf. Sometimes we wish they were also mute. He laughed and then continued, all people, no matter the color of their skin, possess the power to see and hear, but many forget or are made to forget by their parents who have also forgotten. They say things like don't believe everything that is in your mind. It is just your imagination. In this way they cause children to lose their true powers as spiritual members of the universe. They become blind and deaf. Oh, not in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense. Thank the Creator that you have not lost these senses. We believe that there exists a spirit animal for each of us. Your spirit animal will determine what kind of person you are, and what kind of life you will lead. The crow has its own personality, and will show you the direction of your life. It will act as a guide, if you open your eyes and ears to what it has to say. Crows have a job in the world same as every other animal. They are the messengers who travel from one dimension to another. The boy was amazed at what he was hearing, and at the same time began to recall forgotten experiences. He remembered the dream, or at least what he perceived to be a dream. It happened one night when he was about 3 years old. It was as if he was outside of his own body, and gazing down at his sleeping body from high above. He saw himself lying in his bed. Suddenly, the bed turned into a large fire. Then he was lying suspended in air above the fire. A dark figure lurked nearby, and was talking to a woman who was dressed all in white. Even though he was outside of his body, he could still feel the heat of the flames on his back. The dark creature was evil incarnate. There was no doubt about that. The evil one said, "This one is mine." The woman in white said, "You will not have this one, we have plans for him." It was as if I flew down, and was joined as one with myself and the woman. We became one entity and flew away. We soared continually upward past the earth and even the stars. Then as suddenly as it had begun it ended, and I was back in my bed and safe. Will said, "Truly you are one of the chosen few who have succeeded in escaping the grasp of the evil one. You became one with your spirit animal the crow and the Mother Earth. See, everything in the universe that is good is based on 3 things always." "What do you mean, Uncle Will?" said the boy. "Think about it. The entire universe is made up in terms of 3, because it takes 3 points to bring you in full circle. Think of it this way. There is birth, death, and resurrection. There is mother, father, and child. There is life, death, and infinity. The world does not work in the manner that science or even religion would have us believe. It makes no sense that time would travel in a straight line, when everything else in the entire universe travels in circles. Plants burst from the ground, live and die, and then spring to life again. The animals are born, bear their young, die and yet live through their offspring, birth, death and resurrection. Because life is a continuous circle, the circles are bound to interlace like the coils of a spring, or a spiraling wheel within a wheel. This allows different dimensions to be very close to each other. As I said, the crows are the messengers who can travel between the dimensions. It is their purpose, yet the manner in which they do this is left to their whimsical ways. Your spirit animal is the crow. You must watch it closely and listen to what it has to say. It will not steer you wrong. Christian's head seemed about to explode with so much wisdom being given in such a short period of time. It made him almost forget the deep yearning in his heart. He thanked Uncle Will and went on his way. He had one more stop. Chapter 8. Miss Lois owned the cafe at the crossroads at the top of the hill. Christian had saddled his father's black horse and had taken the short ride to the crossroads. When he approached the little cafe, he could see the sign above the door through the mist. The sign read Moon Song Cafe. The building was old but well kept. It belonged to Miss Lois and her brother Danny Moon. That explained the name, or did it? Miss Lois greeted Christian at the door as she did everyone. "Come on in and rest your bones. Let me get you something warm." It did not seem to matter that it was a summer's night. She said the same thing no matter what season it was. Christian was about to understand why. He sat down at one of the tables and Miss Lois said, "What will it be tonight?" Christian ordered lemonade. Miss Lois brought it to him and smiled. She said, "Here is you lemonade and here is a warm hug. Now, what's on your mind, son?" Christian said, "Tell me the story again." Miss Lois asked, "Boy, do you ever get tired of that old story?" He did not. The difference this time was that he knew somehow that he would finally understand. About that time, Danny came up to the stage. He waved to Christian and said, "Get on up here and blow that harp." Christian joined Danny on stage, and Danny began to sing, "Cold coffee, cold women, they won't leave me alone. If I wanted something cold, I'd just go home." Christian played the break on harmonica. That particular song was not a favorite of the lady patrons. Danny had written the song after reaching for his coffee cup, and not realizing that it had gotten cold, took a big sip and exclaimed, "Yuck, cold coffee." Then he thought, "Hey, that is a good title for a song." Christian returned to the table, and Miss Lois sat down, and began to tell the story of the moon song. "Do you remember the story I told you of the night Hank died?" Christian said, "Yes, but please tell it again." Miss Lois said, "All right, it was New Year's Eve 1953. Hank was on his way to a gig up north, and stopped here for a bite to eat. Then he got up on the stage and sang 'I'm so lonesome I could cry.' Tell you what, instead of going through the same old story, let's get Danny to sing the song that his friends put together. You know the one that guy, what's his name, wrote the lyrics and Curtis Shaw wrote the music. I think it's called, Luke Stopped at the Crossroads. Sing it for Christian, Danny." Danny, who was always ready to sing, said, "All right, Lois, here you are." Luke stopped at the crossroads on that cold December night. He ate his last supper by the dim and flickering lights. Miss Lois said, "Hey, won't y'all come in?" Luke knew his time was coming, he could feel it in the wind. "Now, much obliged," he told her as she served up something warm. "I got a long way to go and I think it's gonna storm." They heard a lonesome whistle moan as a train passed in the night. Miss Lois said, "Where you headed on such a cold and dreary night?" Luke said, "I got another gig down this lost highway and I've got miles to go to reach where I gotta play." Now the folks had gathered round for all the stories he would tell about his life on the road and about his own living hell. He said thanks to Miss Lois as he walked to the door. He smiled and he told her, "You won't see me no more." Lord, the tail lights of that caddy faded out of sight, and nobody knew that Luke was going home that night. Luke ate his last supper by the dim and flickering lights, and country music lost old Hank that cold December night. The crowd applauded, and Danny left the stage to take a break. As he sat down, he greeted Christian with, "What's up, tripod?" Christian wondered why he always called him that. Well, maybe he would get it someday. Christian had always sensed that this little place was somehow magical, and in light of all that had happened to him lately, he would not be surprised, or so he thought. Chapter 9. Back at the Portavine house, the creature was restless. There was an emptiness that seemed to consume her. She understood many things, but there were some which even she did not understand. Why had the young man been able to see her at the camp meeting? Why had he not fled in terror like every other mortal who had encountered her? She remembered the night many years ago, when she had crept up to the window next to where the boy slept. Why did she hide herself and stay by his side until morning? She had heard him ask his grandfather about the beautiful melody. It was truly a melody, but why did most people describe it as a scream of terror? These thoughts tormented her. She would ask the crows. She knew their language. The crows had gathered for a big feast. A crow by the name of Jose Cuervo, Joe Crow in English, had been on a scouting mission to find food when he was attracted to a herd of wild hogs, which had been feasting in an old apple orchard, which had been left fallow and abandoned. The apples were lying on the ground for some time, and had begun to ferment. The hogs were quite intoxicated and had been fighting. They were, in fact, very drunk. Jose watched until twilight, and then flew back to his group, which had gone to roost in a stand of trees several miles away. When dawn broke, Jose began screaming, "Wake up! I have a treat for you! It's party time!" The crows, being fun-loving jokesters, followed Jose to the orchard. The hogs were lying around and suffering from terrible hangovers. By the time the creature found the crows, they were well on their way to being drunk. Jose was perched on a high limb, and saw her approach. He called to her, and she came and sat under the tree. Jose said, "Isn't this typical? They drive me crazy. I found this feast, and they are making me stand watch. I will have to wait until tomorrow for my part." The creature said, "I am glad that you are sober, because I have many questions for you." Jose replied, "Go ahead and ask. I have time." She said, "Will you give me a serious answer or just mess with me like you always do?" "You caught me on a good day," said the crow. The creature explained, "Every human except one hears my song as a terrifying scream. Why is it that the young man Christian not only hears my song, but sees my true image as well?" The crow thought about this for a long time and then replied, "Both you and he are confused because each of you possesses only half of the answer. The time is near when the two halves must join." "How will this come about?" she asked. The crow replied, "The universe is made up of dualities. There is darkness, and there is light. Darkness cannot exist without light, and light means nothing without the darkness. The secret is in the light, because without it there would be nothing. There would be no life. Therefore light and darkness attract like positives and negatives. You and the young man each carry the secret of the darkness and the light, but only half. Without each other, the secret will never be revealed to either of you. You must visit the crossroads. Then you will both understand, and the veil of ignorance will be lifted from his eyes, as the veil of the creature will be dropped from you, and memories will in time return to each of you. This is all I am permitted to tell you. Even the crows must live within the rules of the Creator." Chapter 9. Back at the Portavine house, the creature was restless. There was an emptiness that seemed to consume her. She understood many things, but there were some which even she did not understand. Why had the young man been able to see her at the camp meeting? Why had he not fled in terror like every other mortal who had encountered her? She remembered the night many years ago, when she had crept up to the window next to where the boy slept. Why did she hide herself and stay by his side until morning? She had heard him ask his grandfather about the beautiful melody. It was truly a melody, but why did most people describe it as a scream of terror? These thoughts tormented her. She would ask the crows. She knew their language. The crows had gathered for a big feast. A crow by the name of Jose Cuervo, Joe Crow in English, had been on a scouting mission to find food when he was attracted to a herd of wild hogs, which had been feasting in an old apple orchard, which had been left fallow and abandoned. The apples were lying on the ground for some time, and had begun to ferment. The hogs were quite intoxicated and had been fighting. They were, in fact, very drunk. Jose watched until twilight, and then flew back to his group, which had gone to roost in a stand of trees several miles away. When dawn broke, Jose began screaming, "Wake up! I have a treat for you! It's party time!" The crows, being fun-loving jokesters, followed Jose to the orchard. The hogs were lying around and suffering from terrible hangovers. By the time the creature found the crows, they were well on their way to being drunk. Jose was perched on a high limb, and saw her approach. He called to her, and she came and sat under the tree. Jose said, "Isn't this typical? They drive me crazy. I found this feast, and they are making me stand watch. I will have to wait until tomorrow for my part." The creature said, "I am glad that you are sober, because I have many questions for you." Jose replied, "Go ahead and ask. I have time." She said, "Will you give me a serious answer or just mess with me like you always do?" "You caught me on a good day," said the crow. The creature explained, "Every human except one hears my song as a terrifying scream. Why is it that the young man Christian not only hears my song, but sees my true image as well?" The crow thought about this for a long time and then replied, "Both you and he are confused because each of you possesses only half of the answer. The time is near when the two halves must join." "How will this come about?" she asked. The crow replied, "The universe is made up of dualities. There is darkness, and there is light. Darkness cannot exist without light, and light means nothing without the darkness. The secret is in the light, because without it there would be nothing. There would be no life. Therefore light and darkness attract like positives and negatives. You and the young man each carry the secret of the darkness and the light, but only half. Without each other, the secret will never be revealed to either of you. You must visit the crossroads. Then you will both understand, and the veil of ignorance will be lifted from his eyes, as the veil of the creature will be dropped from you, and memories will in time return to each of you. This is all I am permitted to tell you. Even the crows must live within the rules of the Creator." Chapter 10. Almost another year had passed. After Christian had left the moon song that night, he had pondered the words of Hattie about the mysteries of the crossroads. He knew that he had found himself at the crossroads of life. He wondered if this moon song place was really magical, but how could it be otherwise? It was the night of the summer solstice. His beloved grandfather had passed from this life the year before. They had buried him in the cemetery with the other members of the family at Young's Chapel. It was a simple burial without the aid of a funeral-appointed grave digger. Christian and his cousins had dug the grave by hand. Christian's grandmother had said that she did not want to live without her husband. It would not be long until she would join him in the next life. Christian felt much older, but it was more than a feeling. He somehow knew that he was much older inside. He wished he were wiser. He again felt the familiar emptiness inside. The night was warm, and the moon was full and bright, but a gentle breeze was blowing. He was gazing up at the stars when he saw something he had never seen before. It was a crow. Oh, he had seen many crows but never at night. The crow was perched on the gable roof of the house, and was gazing down at him. The crow flew straight up into the air and circled. Then it hovered above him, cawed 3 times, and began to fly slowly toward the crossroads. Christian followed the crow, and watched as it landed on the roof of the Moon Song Cafe. The cafe stood at the top of the hill, rested on a crossroads, not of 2 roads, but of a road and a railroad. When Christian arrived at the cafe, he looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. He thought, why is the door open wide? Was the cafe not closed? Then he realized that the cafe seemed to have an eerie sort of glow about it. He decided to go inside and sit alone and think about the events of his life. Suddenly, the stage footlights began to get brighter. How could this be? He was quite alone, except for the crow, and he had stayed outside. Then before his eyes, she appeared as if she were translucent. He was reminded of the day at the camp meeting. She was wearing the same necklace. As her form became more visible, he could hear her voice gently rising in volume with the brightness of the light. This is what he heard. I sing to your heart a sweet melody, you know I sing it just for thee. Our eyes have met, magic is in the air. I sing for you so sweet and so fair. In this little cafe at the top of the hill where we now meet, we'll remember it still. The cool breeze is blowing and the moon shines above. In the little cafe we're falling in love. Yes, we're falling in love this very night as I sing for you so sweet and so bright. When the song is over, we'll walk to the porch. We'll sit together and I'll feel your warm touch. Outside the cafe in the pale moonlight we'll dance together and hold each other tight. This feels so right. It cannot be wrong? The melody we sing will be our own moon song. The sadness in your heart soon will be gone, because tonight we sing our own moon song. Christian thought he must be in heaven. This beautiful creature must surely be an angel. When the song was over, they met on the empty dance floor, and looked into each other's eyes. As they embraced and kissed, the necklaces they were each wearing combined to form a glistening diamond split vertically, with half on Christian's necklace, and half on the lady's necklace. The two triangles had joined, and then split into two. Beams of light flashed in every direction at once. Then as they held each other, they heard a terrible scream as the spirit of the creature departed. The lovers had now become one with this union, and they wanted to know everything about each other. Then it occurred to him, I do not even know your name. The young woman replied, I am Jeanette Camille Portavine. A strange feeling came over Christian as he wondered, can it be that this is not the first life we have shared? Chapter 11. As the crow had predicted, wisdom came slowly in the form of memories, but it was as if they were masked by a sort of mist. The couple once again understood that their lives were joined for some purpose, but that purpose would not come quickly. Now Christian was faced with a dilemma. How would he explain the sudden appearance of a wife? Yes, a wife, there was no doubt about that part. While they might not be sure about the future or even all of the past, the fact was that they both knew that they were destined to be together forever. A plan was soon hatched. It would be a way to both explain his new bride, as well as provide the couple with the means to explore the mysteries which confronted them. But first he needed to understand the mystery of the necklace. He thought about the two black triangles. He realized that the one which hung from her neck was the same that was on the forehead of the creature. His on the other hand had been dropped on him by a crow. The two together had become one. His had the point facing up, while the point of hers faced down. Then when joined, they became two beautiful, but independent clear sparkling diamonds. Then he understood. It was what old Hattie and Uncle Will had told him. Life was like a cross. They had said that he must make the cross into a circle, and that the only way to do that was with a triangle. He gazed at the diamond on his silver chain, and envisioned a cross. He quickly found a pencil and sketched a cross. Then he drew a line from each of the 4 points of the cross. The resulting image was that of a diamond. The harmony of the earth was now obvious. Coal, which was darkness, can become a diamond. Darkness becomes light. Was it all part of the Creator's master plan? Are all things somehow eternal? Even though they die in physical form, they exist in the spirit, and are destined to return to life? Are hardships, trials, and tribulations as much a part of the world as joy and love? Many lessons of his youth came back to him, especially the lessons he learned from his grandfather. He remembered his grandfather's lesson of the trees. He had asked his grandfather why life could sometimes be difficult. This was the old man's wise reply. Christian, you are a fine young fellow, you are straight and tall and good-looking. Why do you reckon that is? I will tell you. Look at the trees in the forest. Have you noticed how straight and tall they are? Well, that is because they have to compete with all of the other trees, in order to get the light from the sun. The way to the sun is straight and narrow. Now, consider the tree out in the pasture. It has no hardship. It has all the sun and soil it needs. That tree is crooked, short, and windswept, because not only does it have no competition, it has no protection from the wind. It was another example of duality of life. The good, the bad, the positive and the negative, the shadow and the light all contribute. The man is nothing without the woman. Another time his grandfather had said, when some bad or dark things in life start to trouble you, just remember wherever there is a shadow, there has to be a light. Oh, and one more thing, boy, the tall young trees soon learn that the secret is to be strong enough to bend. Okay, Christian thought, enough pondering for now. It was time to implement his plan. His family had almost always been involved in the military. He knew of only 2 of the last 6 generations, which had not been in some type of conflict. He thought about how many times his ancestors had been on the rebellious side of conflicts. His ancestor had been one of William the Conqueror's principal knights when he overthrew the sitting ruler of the English Empire. Then again, his ancestor had joined the American colonists' revolt, and finally his grandfather's father had joined the Confederate Army and given his life for that cause. This one was the one which bothered him the most. He understood well the difficult decisions which were made. He knew about the horrors of slavery, and yet he also understood that the war was about the Constitution. Specifically, it was about the 10th Amendment which guaranteed states' rights. He was grateful that he had not been faced with that decision. In spite of his heritage or because of it, he considered himself a patriot. He made his decision. He would enlist in the United States Marine Corps. It was perfect. Chapter 12. The island was located in the land of the Gullah. These were Africans destined to be slaves when Sherman burnt the city of Atlanta and marched to the sea. They had been freed, and had followed Sherman's forces to Savannah. After sparing the city of Savannah and presenting it to Mr. Lincoln as a birthday gift, the great general boarded a ship, waved to the freed slaves and departed. The slaves who fled to the lowlands were called Gullah. The island was a part of this lowland coastal region, which lay off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. The Europeans called it by many names. The Americans named it Paris Island. Before enlisting, Christian had asked about the history of the island, and learned that the French had been the first to land here in the 16th century. There had been no record of inhabitants prior to this occupation. The French military detachment had mutinied, built a ship on the island, and returned to France. The colonists moved to the mainland. The Spanish had the next turn, and occupied the island as a military outpost, until the English gained control in the next century. An Englishman had purchased this island and 8 others for the purpose of raising indigo and later cotton. The island remained divided into a series of plantations, until the end of the Civil War. Many freed slaves had taken shelter there, and a school had been established by abolitionists. It was now MCRD, Marine Corps Recruit Depot. Christian had walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office in his hometown and said, "Sign me up." The recruiter said, "Hold on, boy. It is not that easy. First, you have to pass the test." Christian said, "I'm plenty strong and used to hard work." The recruiter said, "I can see that, but I'm talking about the mental test." The recruiter had his doubts about this country boy, but handed him the written test, and told him to go in the other room. Christian emerged with test in hand in record time. This made the recruiter roll his eyes. This boy could not have completed that test that quickly. He most likely just gave up. What else is new? The recruiter had gotten used to people failing the test. This was the time of the Vietnam War, and some qualified young men had enrolled in college to avoid the draft. The recruiter was delighted with the results of the test and said, "What job do you want and how soon can you leave?" Christian said, "Let Uncle Sam decide what he needs me to do, and I can leave today." The recruiter said, "Hold on, hotshot. I can get you to the Afis station tomorrow, and you can be at Paris Island day after tomorrow." That is how he had come to be aboard a crowded bus from the airport, and on his way to the island. Everyone aboard the bus was having a grand time. They were smoking, laughing and joking. They were doing all that, but were unaware of what awaited them when they arrived. Christian sat quietly on the bus thinking about the recent events of his life. He thought about Jeanette, and wondered if she had made it safely to New Orleans. He thought about the oath he had sworn at the Afis station. He had repeated, "I, Christian Lathan Baggett, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States, and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God." He thought about the oath, and wondered what would happen if the President forgot the Constitution. He wondered if his great-great-grandfather had struggled with the same thoughts when he joined the Army of Northern Virginia in 1862. This was not the time, nor the place for these thoughts. The bus was coming to a halt at the depot. It was dark when the bus arrived, and most everyone on the bus was thrown into a state of shock by the group of drill instructors who had boarded the bus screaming like maniacs, something about yellow footprints. The group was outside the bus being pushed and shoved into place by the screaming lunatics. Christian, holding his bags and trying to comply with whatever it was they wanted him to do, when he realized there at his feet were yellow footprints painted on the concrete. The only problem was that they were facing in the wrong direction. This explained the next series of events. The screaming lunatics were physically spinning the confused recruits around. Once everyone was facing in the proper direction, with their feet placed precisely on the yellow footprints, which were at a 45-degree angle, meaning that each recruit's heels were closer together than their toes, the lunatic drill instructors with their loud voices and their campaign hats began to systematically silence any vocal members of the herd. The chief drill instructor began, "All right, maggots. So you slimes think you are good enough to be in my Marine Corps? I can't hear you." No wonder he couldn't hear. Nobody had said a word. He continued, "When a drill instructor asks you a question, the first and last words out of your scuzzy mouths will be sir." The herd said, as they had been referred to by the DI, "Sir, yes sir." The DI said, "I can't hear you." The herd responded with a louder, "Sir, yes sir." He continued, "All right ladies. Get this straight and get it straight now. For the next 8 weeks your asses belong to me. I will be your mama, and I will be your daddy, but I'll be damned if I will be your dog lassie. Now when I say move, you will move. Is that understood?" "Sir, yes sir." "I can't hear you." "Sir, yes sir." "Now move." The recruits had no problem understanding move, but move where? The raving group of lunatics had no trouble getting their desires met. It became quickly apparent that they intended for the group, or herd as they referred to them, to move into the long building in front of them. Above the door, a sign read, "Receiving." Once inside the receiving barracks, the recruits were stationed in 2 rows facing each other. There was a long table in the center of the room. A DI drill instructor walked on top of the long table. He was carrying a large brown paper bag. Each recruit was given a similar bag and instructed to strip and place their clothes and other belonging into the bags. They were given markers and instructed to write their home address on the outside of the bag. If any recruit attempted to conceal any contraband, perhaps a picture of a sweetheart, it was taken by the DI and placed in the bag for disposal. This process was designed to sever all civilian ties. That process was continued with a shower for everyone, but especially for the less hygienically inclined, and the issue of the green work uniforms called utilities. To further enhance the experience, the recruits were given buzz cuts. After the stripping of the civilian scum, the recruits were assigned bunks, called racks, for the night. No one was permitted to speak. As the DI had said, "We will tell you when to eat. We will tell you when to speak, and we will tell you when you can go to the head bathroom. We will tell you when to think, and we will tell you what to think." The next morning the herd went for a 2-mile run. The DI screamed, "Fall out." At this command, the recruits ran as quickly as possible out to the yellow footprints, with all their issued gear in their sea bags. While standing at attention, they were instructed to hoist their sea bags to their shoulders, and run as a group to their new home. Then the process of turning what the DIS called the lowest form of pond scum on Earth into U.S. Marines had begun. The 8 weeks passed, and of the 175 original recruits, 43 graduated. Christian was on his way to his new career. He was now a United States Marine. Chapter 13. Jeanette Camille Portavine arrived at the train station in New Orleans, and was met at the station by her cousin Sally. Sally had been named after the original Sally Portavine. Jeanette's memories of her childhood were clouded by the influence of the creature, which had possessed her for so many years. She knew little of the culture of her temporary home in Alabama, and even less about her new temporary home in the bayou. Sally said, "Come child, brought yo'self here and let me see over you." Jeanette was amused by the Cajun dialect. Sally said, "My, I garin want ta tell you, you one mighty fine looking ting. Let's brought yo'self home while ago." The house was located at the end of a lane, which was draped on either side by huge live oaks with Spanish moss. The trees reminded her of the old house of her youth. She had thought it very strange that it too had Spanish moss and live oaks. It was the only place she had seen these things in North Alabama. Sally introduced Jeanette to her relatives. Her great-aunt Marie was a quadroon. Jeanette could tell that in her younger days, Marie must have been strikingly beautiful. The so-called quadroons were of mixed racial and ethnic origins. They were the product of the succession of peoples who settled in New Orleans, and were made up of a mixture of French, Indian, Spanish and African blood. More precisely, the definition applied to anyone who had one grandparent who was the child of a union between a Caucasian and a black African, with the other three grandparents being Caucasian. The term, however, did not fit Marie exactly, because her mother had been the child of a mulatto mother and father. The racial mix was the same, and this made her a quadroon or one-quarter African. Marie's grandmother was a direct descendant of the voodoo queen or high priestess, Marie Laveau. Marie embraced Jeanette and began, "Let me tell you what I know about this side of your family. The first Marie Laveau was a hairdresser in New Orleans. You look surprised. It is true that she was the first great voodoo priestesses, but she, like the ones who followed her, had to live within the society. The occupation of hairdresser gave her best direct access to the wealthy. She gained credibility by listening to the gossip of the day. She worked and listened to the conversations of the rich women who were her clientele. In this way she could pass along predictions to other women in the upper classes. They would be amazed at her accuracy. She really did know the ways of voodoo, maybe better than anyone had known before her. Her African mother had taught her the ways, the ones she herself had brought with her from Africa. Her methods were very secretive, but her results were renowned. Of course the African community would come to her for help often, but most days there were as many white visitors as there were black. She believed in the power of roots, stones and bones, meaning that everything has a direct connection with the earth. Jeanette listened intently to what Marie had to say, and then asked, "Auntie Marie, I have felt many things, many mysteries, but was frightened to tell them to anyone. While the creature was within me, I had to remain hidden. I was a creature of the night, but I have overheard many conversations about voodoo and hoodoo as well. Most of the time, anyone who tried to talk about mysterious things, they were silenced with quoted verses from the Bible, and threatened with eternal punishment by fire and brimstone." The old lady stroked Jeanette's coal-black hair, looked directly into her emerald-green eyes and said, "Oh child, you have much to learn. Have you not heard the stories of the birth of Jesus? Where do you think the Magi came from? Even their names Magi is the basis for the word magical. What were the gifts they brought to the child? They brought gold, frankincense and myrrh. These are the same ingredients used to this day in mojos. The sad fact is that the Holy Church has been hijacked by well-meaning but mislead people. The Creator gave us all a brain and free will. Listen to your heart and use your brain. Do not let the zealots steer you wrong. Stay here with me while your future husband is away, and I will share my knowledge and teach you how to use your powers for good." It was ironic. Christian was being reconstructed by USMC training, and Jeanette was being reformed by her family. Chapter 14. The French Quarter was filled with people in town for Mardi Gras. The street vendors were crying, "File gumbo." Marie smiled. "These people have no idea what they are saying. Gumbo is the African word for okra." She chuckled. Women were standing on the balconies and catching the beads which were thrown to them. Sally asked, "Jeanette, are you excited?" She replied, "I have never been more excited in my life. Christian will be arriving soon, and I feel like I'm about to explode with joy." The women hurried to the train station. Jeanette could not believe her eyes. There on the platform was what she believed to be the most handsome man she had ever seen. There he stood in his dress blues, straight as an arrow, razor creases in his trousers, shoes so shiny you could see yourself in a brass buckle that would put the sun to shame, and shining through it all was his smiling face. They ran to each other's arms and kissed. Jeanette said, "Oh Christian, in my wildest dreams, I never could imagine what happiness true love could bring. It seems an eternity since I held you." Christian said, "Eternity begins now." Marie said, "You young guns don't need us around. Go enjoy le baton relay, and we will see you tomorrow at the wedding." The couple wandered the French Quarter. They stopped to listen to the Dixieland music and watch the people dance. They ate mudbugs, crawfish, and jambalaya. They laughed and sipped wine. Life was good. Tomorrow was to be their wedding day, but for now they would say goodbye until tomorrow. The couple returned to the home of Jeanette's Aunt Marie. Christian was shown to his room, and Jeanette retired to her own room. Christian had rented a room above Bourbon Street for the honeymoon. He lay awake thinking only of Jeanette. The next morning was spent preparing for the wedding. Because of the unique nature of this particular union, a modified voodoo wedding ceremony was planned. The wedding would take place in the ballroom of the same hotel. When they arrived at the place where the wedding would be performed, there must have been a couple hundred people there. Upon her arrival, Jeanette was whisked away by her cousins. Christian waited patiently, well as patiently as was possible under the circumstances. Eventually the drummer, who was stationed in the corner of the room, began a steady beat, softly at first, then growing louder and more rapid as Marie entered the room. She wore a beautiful silk dress, and had a matching scarf about her head. The steady drone of the drumming induced a hypnotic feeling. When Marie had reached the center of the room directly over the diamond shape, which had been drawn on the floor with a piece of colored chalk, she fell to the floor and began to move as if she had no arms or legs. Then suddenly she sprang to her feet, and to the astonishment of everyone who witnessed it, there in the center of her forehead was a triangle, black as night. Her movements were cat-like as she addressed the group. "I am the one you know of as the thing that screams in the night. Before this union can be completed, there are things that I must share with you. I cannot tell you everything because the time is not yet right, but what I must tell you now is how I came to inhabit the body of the beautiful young girl called Jeanette. At Marie's own wedding ceremony many years ago, I was called by the Creator to enter the body of a mambo, voodoo priestess. Something happened which threw me out and another spirit took my place. With the help of other mambos, the other spirit was thrown out, but the evil ones, the ones who fought with the forces of the Creator eons ago, would not allow me to return. I was forced to wander for many years. I had to find a body, but it had to be the right one, for I could only be freed by true love, because true love will defeat evil always. If you understand, or remember anything you hear today, remember this. True love is more precious, even more than the magical diamonds in the necklaces, which are now about the necks of these two young people. As for my own nature, I will tell you only this one more thing. I am a gypsy spirit. I am destined to wander for all ages. It is my duty to search eternally. I must wander in order to spread knowledge throughout the universe, and to do battle with hatred incarnate. The possessed body of Marie again fell to the floor, but quickly arose again. As she stared at the couple, the triangle faded and disappeared. She was Marie again, and had no recollection of the events of the past minute. The wedding guests and the wedding party seemed to be oblivious to the possession. It was as if they had been in some type of suspended animation. The ceremony continued. Marie instructed the couple to join hands. The group then repeated in unison, "Hail Mary, full of grace. Blessed are you among women and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen." Marie whispered, "Mademoiselle. I pronounce you man et femme, man and wife." The couple embraced each other, then Marie. The drummer played rapidly as the party began. Christian and Jeanette could think only of each other, and after an appropriate amount of time, slipped quietly from the room. The guests were polite enough to pretend they did not notice. When they reached their room at the top of the stairs, Christian carried Jeanette across the threshold, and they kissed each other tenderly. Life was good. Jeanette said, "The Creator will keep us free." She leaned over and blew out the scented candle. Chapter 15. Christian thought about the lessons he had learned, and reflected on his career. As he did, he recalled an adventure he had right after graduation from boot camp. It had happened he had received his orders, and before he had left for his 10-day leave. He remembered wandering around the small town of Beaufort, South Carolina. He and his friend David McLeod, who had been with him since that first day on the island, were happy that the trials of boot camp were behind them. He recalled the first night in the barracks. After lights out that first night and when everyone was asleep except the fire watch, he had reached up with his foot and nudged the Marine on the top bunk above him. A voice had whispered, "What you want?" Christian whispered, "Where you from?" David McLeod replied, "The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, how about you?" "Ball Play, Alabama," Christian replied. "What made you join up?" asked Christian. McLeod said, "I needed a pair of shoes." From that first night, they had become inseparable. It was a friendship that was destined to endure the tests of time. After they had seen everything that the little town had to offer, which did not take long, McLeod said, "Reckon what else is around here?" Christian said, "Alligators when the tide is out and sharks when it is in." McLeod said, "I mean, are there any farms or anything like that? I'm homesick for the country, but all I can see around here is flat swampland." Christian said, "Well, there is one way to find out. Let's go." The two stuck out their thumbs and started out on an adventure that neither would forget. They hitched a ride with a man in a pickup truck with sacks of corn and rice in the back. There were also fresh vegetables like okra and tomatoes. The driver of the truck said, "Where you boys headed?" "Any place but here," they replied. "Come go with me to the ring shout," said the driver. Shortly, they arrived at a small village on a spot of high ground near the coast. It was a Gullah village. The men noticed that the doors of the small houses were painted bright blue, the same blue color that had adorned the front door of Uncle Will's and Miss Hattie's home, back in the Ball Play swamp. Christian recalled Miss Hattie telling him why she had selected that particular shade. She had told him that the color would ward off witches. Guillaume, the man who had given them a ride, invited them into his house where his wife Annette welcomed them into the house. It was a modest home and typical of the other houses, which were situated in seemingly random fashion around a large open area. Upon entering the front room, they noticed that the walls were papered with copies of newspapers. The papers reminded McLeod of his mountain home. Some of his neighbors had used cardboard to cover the cracks in the walls of their houses to keep out the chilly winds. As with the doors, the newspapers served another purpose. The Gullahs believed that any evil spirit who tried to do them harm would have to stop and read every word, before they would be able to work any spells on the inhabitants. After a short visit in the house, the men had been invited to join the residents around a large fire in the center of the open space outside. As they sat, they watched the women preparing a communal feast in large cast iron pots which hung over the fire. As they sat and watched, the men sat around smoking and telling tales. The children sat and listened intently as the stories of Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox were repeated. The stories were already familiar to Christian and David, because they too had heard them when they were children. They did not know that these were traditional Gullah tales, which were based on the African animal entities of ancient African beliefs. The meal was delicious. It consisted of a gumbo with rice and corn served with a sort of pasty corn cake. After the meal, it was time for the ring shout. Everyone gathered in a large circle and the drumming and dancing began. The men were caught up in the rhythm, and when it seemed to reach its peak, many of the dancers seemed to be possessed by spirits. They began shouting in unknown tongues and praising the Holy Spirit. It was in fact the Gullah practice of combining the traditional African animal gods with the Christian god of their former owners of generations past. The men thanked the Gullah for their hospitality, and were shown to their accommodations for the night. In the morning on the long ride back to base, the men asked Guillaume about the African animal spirits. He explained in his Creole dialect, "The animals are older and wiser than us. Even your Bible explains that they were here in this place long before us. They are our brothers, protectors and teachers. We can learn much from the wisdom of the animals. They accept nature without question. They do not use up the resources of the earth for gain, the way humans do. Let me tell you a story. There was a boy by the name of Simon. Here is the way the story was told to me. Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Simon. His mother worked at the big house, and Simon would play in the yard while his mama worked in the house. One day Simon decided to disobey his mother and venture outside the yard and into the woods. He sat down beside the creek, and by he heard a voice saying, "Cut a cane pole, Simon. Cut a cane pole." So he cut a pole from the canebrake beside the creek. Then a voice said, "Pull some thread from your clothes, Simon. Pull some thread from your clothes." He did as the voice said, and tied it to the end of the pole. Then a voice said, "Take the straight pin from your shirt and make a hook." So he did as the voice said to do, and tied the hook to the line. Then he heard the voice say, "Dig me up, Simon. Dig me up." He began to dig in the soft soil beside the creek and found a worm. The worm said, "Put me on the hook, Simon. Put me on the hook." He put the worm on the hook and dropped it in the water. Then he heard a voice say, "Pull me up, Simon. Pull me up." He pulled up the line and had a fish on it. The fish said, "Cut me up, Simon. Cut me up." When Simon had cut up the fish, a voice said, "Build a fire, Simon. Build a fire." So Simon built a fire and let it burn down to the coals. Then a voice said, "Cook me up, Simon. Cook me up." So Simon cooked the fish. Then a voice said, "Eat me up, Simon. Eat me up." So he ate the fish. There was a black gum tree growing beside the creek, and suddenly a door opened in the trunk of the tree. A voice said, "Come inside, Simon. Come inside." He did, and the tree closed around him. Back at the big house, his mama had finished her work and went to find Simon. Of course, he could not be found. Simon's mother was very upset. She asked the people at the big house to help her find Simon. The men and the dogs went in search of Simon. The dogs treed on the black gum tree and barked until the men cut down the tree. Simon emerged unharmed from the tree, but ever since that day black gum trees have been hard to cut. In the story Simon heard voices, but not with his ears. The voices he heard were different animal spirits, some familiar and some not so familiar. The tree is meant to represent the wall which stands between us and the creatures of the land, and the assistance offered by the men with the help of the dogs who have been our allies since the beginning, represents our need to accept assistance from each other, in order to really comprehend the world around us. The fact that the source of the voice was invisible tells us that the things that we can see are not the only reality. We feel what we cannot see. Think of all the very real things of the universe which are invisible. Consider the wind, it moves even the strongest trees, and love which can melt the coldest heart. All things have their own characteristics. You would be good to learn them. Our brothers in the realm of the animals can be our guides if we only learn to listen. They are the true natives of this realm. We are only visitors from an alien world. The men considered all that they had heard and all that they had experienced, and went back to their lives with their spiritual eyes opened a bit wider than before. Chapter 16. When they returned from their 10-day leave after boot camp, the two men had discovered that they would be stationed on different bases, and in different MOS, military occupational specialty. David was to enter a completely new field called computer science, while Christian had been assigned to counterintelligence as a linguistic analyst. Neither of them had a clue what these meant. David and Christian both finished their basic schools at the top of their classes. This allowed them to advance to the next level immediately. After advanced classes were completed, each of the men received orders to report to their respective duty stations, David McLeod to the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia, and Christian Baggett to a secret base near 29 Palms, California. McLeod had begun his duty in the computer room at S4 at Quantico. They had a new state-of-the-art mainframe, which was housed in a 12 by 20-foot room. The computer components lined the walls from floor to ceiling on three sides of the room. The primary function of this system was to track the movements of all weapons in the charge of the USMC in the Western Hemisphere. The computer utilized cards which had a series of holes punched into them to allow light to pass. These cards were created by way of a special keyboard. Once the cards were punched, they could be fed into the computer and transferred to a tape, which also had the same series of light-emitting holes punched into them via the computer. Once the tape was run, it could then be fed into the computer to enable transfer of the information to a printed sheet which consisted of stock which had been fed into a dot matrix tractor-fed printer. The entire system had 4K of RAM, random access memory, and 256K of hard disk space. Christian was in a much different situation. He had been dropped off in the desert alone with only enough supplies to keep him alive. His mission was to think. That was it, sit, think, and observe. Observe everything around him, and perceive as much as possible about his surroundings. If there was any further method to this madness, it had not been shared with him. He had positioned himself in front of a large tree. As a matter of fact, it was the only tree, other than palms, within 100 miles. He sat, and he pondered this oddity for hours. How could it be that there, in the Mojave Desert, where there is only a harsh environment and almost no water, could a huge white oak exist? As he sat and gazed at the huge tree, he seemed to perceive some type of messages in the form of thoughts. The voice in his head was saying, "Lathan Baggett, I am the spirit of your ancestor, your namesake. I am the druid priest. I am Lathan the First." Christian thought, is this my imagination again? The voice continued, did you not find it strange to see a tree like this in the desert? Understand, I am visible only to you. The method is an ancient one which will soon be referred to as new. It is not new. It has been on this planet for eons. Know that time as you perceive it is a product only of the limitations of your human brain, but the brain is only a physical organ made of flesh and charged with electricity. As your soul inhabits your body, so does your spirit inhabit your brain. This will not be the only tool available to you to accomplish your destiny. When your leaders come to return you to your station, you must contact the man named McLeod. Ask him about his dream. Christian tried to get answers from this entity. Hey. Wait, I had a lot of questions. Who are you? What are you? Why are you doing this to me? What do you want? It was clear that this communication was a one-way trip. The spirit or whatever it was could not or would not hear him. Then he watched silently as the tree faded and disappeared. He thought about the encounter, but could not rationalize it, so he was forced to just follow the instructions and contact his friend in hopes of gaining more insight. He could only assume that there was some kind of master plan for the universe, and that he would soon learn his role, and like all good Marines he wondered, why in the hell did they drop me in this place to begin with? And at the same time he remembered the old saying, yours is not to wonder why, yours is just to do and die. Semper Fi. Semper Fidelis means always faithful. Chapter 17. Sergeant Baggett sat in his office thinking about the events of the past 4 years, and his work in counterintelligence. He had learned far more than he had expected, especially about the evil of this world. Hopefully he had done his part to help to combat, or at least slow it down. The Soviet Empire was still alive, and seemingly going well in spite of his and his colleagues' effort to throw as many roadblocks at them as they could. He wondered what new threats might be on the horizon. Then his thoughts went to a familiar place. He thought about his loving wife and the life they had created. They never missed the annual Marine Corps Ball on November 10th each year, although he was lucky to get one dance with Jeanette. He had thought that she could not be more beautiful and charming than the day they met. He could not have been more wrong. She was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. His blissful mental journey was rudely interrupted by the phone. Counterintelligence. Sergeant Baggett speaking, sir or ma'am. How may I help you? A familiar voice replied, you mean Staff Sergeant Baggett, don't you? Christian asked, Colonel Keller? The battalion commander Colonel Scott Keller replied, it ain't Mickey Mouse. Get your ass down to battalion if you want this rocker. He knew that the colonel was referring to the curved rocker underneath the upside-down VS, which made up the chevron which was sewn on each sleeve of his tropical shirt. Yes, sir. I will be there ASAP. As Christian entered the colonel's office, he stopped in front of the desk and said, Sergeant Baggett reporting as ordered, sir. At ease, Sergeant, barked the colonel. Then he read the words of the promotion warrant, to all who shall see these presents greetings. Know ye that reposing special trust and confidence in the fidelity and ability of Christian Lathan Baggett, I do appoint him a staff sergeant meritoriously, on this the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord 1974. The colonel shook his hand and asked the aide to take a picture. Christian thought, I will call Jeanette and tell her the good news. Then he reconsidered and decided to tell her in person. As he was leaving battalion headquarters, a horrible thought occurred to him. I am a slick-sleeved staff sergeant. The men will give me hell. Every 4 years, each Marine received a diagonal hash mark. It would be sewn on his sleeve between the elbow and the wrist, but he had another month before he received his first hash mark. That made him a rare specimen indeed. It made him a slick-sleeved staff sergeant. Oh well, he would just have to live with it for another month. He had done his job well, and of the 4 previous promotions he had received, 3 had been meritorious, meaning that they were issued before the customary time and grade requirements, and were based outstanding or meritorious actions. He hurried to the quarters in NCO, non-commissioned officers, housing there on the base. He rushed in the door and yelled, Jeanette, great news! She met him at the door and told her the good news. I am so proud of you, she said. Chapter 18. As soon as he returned to base, Christian called his friend MacLeod. He said, David, this is Christian. The voice on the other end of the line said, I know who you are. How the hell are you? The reply was, confused. He related the entire episode to MacLeod and inquired, You had any dreams lately? MacLeod replied, Funny you should ask. I had the wildest dream I ever had. It was like one of those, what do they call them, lucid dreams. It was like I was outside my body and traveling in space, but not just space, but time as well. It was crazy. I saw myself in the Scottish Highlands, the home of my ancestors. I was sitting in a hut and part of some kind of tribunal. A man was brought into the room, and asked to sit in the center of the circle. The leader of our clan addressed the man, Why have you traveled from England to visit this clan? The stranger replied, I am the druid priest Lathan. I am here to give a prediction. I was visited by a raven. The raven told me to come here and relay his words to you. The leader of the clan said, Why did the raven not come to us directly? The druid asked, Do you speak the language of the raven? The leader of the clan did not answer the question, but asked the druid to continue. The druid continued, There is one among the MacLeods who is alive in another dimension of time, yet is here among us even now. He must find the mediator between his kin and mine, if we are to defeat the master of darkness. I have no more to say. Christian said, What the hell do you reckon that means? Beats me, replied MacLeod. Christian wondered who he might get to help unravel this mystery. Then it hit him. He would to talk to Miss Hattie. On his next weekend pass, Christian and Jeanette traveled back to Alabama. After a brief visit with relatives, they went to visit Miss Hattie. He had not seen Uncle Will or Miss Hattie since his enlistment. The old couple met them at the door. Miss Hattie said, Lord child, you is one handsome boy. Nah, you is a man if I ever seen one. Come give a poor old woman a hug. Christian related the story to Miss Hattie. She sat back and puffed on her pipe for a while, looked at Christian and Jeanette and said, I think this is good juju. There are many things of this world that ain't right somehow. Our lives used to be simpler. We used the gifts of the earth in sensible ways. We did not squander our good gifts of the earth the way they are being squandered now. We would never treat our own mothers the way we treat the earth. We would not waste the good things. I tell you, child, these bad things can only be the work of the dark forces. I think we should commune with the ones who have gone before. They are just on the other side. I can get us there quickly. She had them join hands and began to channel the spirits. It reminded them of the ceremony when Marie had been possessed by the spirit of the thing. Miss Hattie began to speak, but not in her own voice. She was speaking in a voice that was difficult to understand. It sounded like a Celtic accent. The voice said, Look for a man they call Andries. He will show you the way. Christian asked, How will I find this person? The entity replied, Ask MacLeod. Miss Hattie opened her eyes and asked, What did you learn, children? Christian replied, Only that we should ask MacLeod about a man called Andries. Miss Hattie asked, "Do you know of a man named McLeod?" Christian replied, "Yes, he is my best buddy." Miss Hattie said, "Go then and seek this man. He will have the key which unlocks this knowledge." Christian and Jeanette thanked Miss Hattie and went on their way. When they returned home to the base, there was a message on their voicemail: "This is McLeod. Give me a call. You ain't going to believe this." Christian called McLeod and asked about Andries. McLeod said, "It is an old family name, but I do not know anyone by that name." Christian said, "What is it you wanted anyway?" McLeod said, "Did you check your mail, because I have a copy of orders which list you and me to report to Colonel Keller for some kind of duty assignment. Get this. It is for an accompanied tour. You are supposed to bring Jeanette." "Are you serious?" asked Christian. "Jeanette? Why would the orders include Jeanette? She is not in the Marine Corps." Sure enough, when Christian checked his mail, there were the orders for the accompanied tour and a letter from Colonel Keller requesting that Jeanette come too. Chapter 19. Colonel Keller sat in his office and waited. Sitting beside him was CIA agent Andries McLeod, a distant relative of David McLeod. A voice on the intercom said, "Colonel, your visitors have arrived." "Show them in," he said. The men reported to the colonel and he said, "At ease, men, have a seat. This young lady must be Jeanette. I am very happy to finally meet you. I know that you are all wondering why you are here. I will start by introducing you to our other guest. This is Special Agent Andries McLeod. He is with the CIA, and also happens to be a distant relative of yours. McLeod, meet a member of your clan." Christian, Jeanette, and David were speechless. The colonel continued, "You have all been selected for a very special assignment. I will let Agent McLeod explain." The agent began by saying, "We are involved in a very special and very complex project, which involves aspects of this world, which we do not fully understand. The secret agencies of our government have been watching and wondering about the connection our families share. All I can say now is that it involves not just special elements of each of your physical makeup, but spiritual and even virtual aspects which are unique to each of you. This exercise requires complete commitment from each of you, and will be strictly voluntary. Are you interested?" They all had the same thought. Could it be that after all this time, they might finally understand the mysteries of their lives, and perhaps even use the powers for good? The agent continued, "Here is the way this will work. You Marines will be given honorable discharges. McLeod, we have established a special link for you at S4. This will allow you to have access to the supercomputer via the Ethernet. Baggett, it will be easier for you because you are already attached to counterintelligence and have the necessary clearances. Ms. Baggett, you may be wondering how you were selected. We have access to all of the medical records from the Navy hospitals." Jeanette was confused and asked, "What does that have to do with your selection?" The agent replied, "Excellent question, Ms. Baggett. I wish I could tell you that all of you have been selected for this project because of your qualifications. However, that is not the case. You were selected because of a DNA search engine. You each have very special DNA. You will learn more about this as the project develops. Hell, we don't understand it all ourselves." The three young people were excited and at the same time very afraid. They wondered if they were being used as guinea pigs. The agent said, "You have 1 month to decide." McLeod thought, "Supercomputer? What's Ethernet?" Colonel Keller said, "I have approved 30-day leaves for each of you. I have only one more piece of information for you. Should you agree, you will see and experience remarkable things beyond the limits of our understanding. This assignment will not only allow you to serve your country, it will give you a unique opportunity to serve the Earth and all that is good about the universe." Christian wondered, "What in the world is DNA?" Jeanette and Christian started back home and Christian asked, "What do you think this all means?" Jeanette replied, "I am not really sure what to think, but I keep thinking that we are destined to be a part of something of real importance in the world. We have not exactly lived normal lives. Well, I certainly have not." Christian said, "The family reunion is coming up this Sunday. Why don't we just go home and enjoy ourselves? We can talk about it. Chapter 20. The Baggett family reunion was held at Nakalula Falls Park in Gadsden, Alabama. The falls occupied a place in the history of North Alabama from the time of the first people who inhabited the area. The waters of Black Creek had been cascading off this 90-foot cliff since thousands of years before the first people arrived. The waters of the creek had hollowed out a large cave at the bottom of the cliff behind falling waters. This cave was home to groups of hunter-gatherers during the Mississippian period. Later, after the Europeans appeared, it served as a meeting place. Even then it was a place which was easy to recognize. The Europeans and the Native Americans would meet at the falls and trade with one another. When Christian was a boy, he visited here before the fences were built to restrict access to the edge of the cliff. He spent many days just exploring the creek, above and below the falls. Now he was here once again for the reunion, this time with his wife. Christian's grandmother was sitting outside the shelter and saw Christian when he arrived. She and Jeanette were talking. Christian had wandered off and was talking to his cousin Jerry about their grandfather. Jerry asked, "Did you ever go to trade day with Papa?" Christian replied, "I sure did." Jerry asked, "Did he take biscuits?" Christian replied, "He sure did." They looked at each other and began to laugh. Jerry said, "I used to go with him too and he would always have biscuits with him." Christian said, "Yes, I remember. We would stop on the side of the road whenever we saw a stray dog. Papa would lure the starving dog into the truck with one of the biscuits. If the dog was a hound, it miraculously would be transformed into a coon or possum hound with excellent hunting skills. If it looked more like the terrier type, it would become a squirrel dog. It took me some time to figure out how Papa had known so much about these strays when he had never seen them before, but when he got ready to sell them, he knew their history. Finally it dawned on me. He had indeed never seen these dogs before, but had little trouble selling them to unsuspecting hunters at the trade day. One day I got up the courage to question his business ethics. I said, "Papa, is this right to sell these dogs this way?" Papa said, "Well, it may not be exactly right, but that's what all the other people are doing." The more I pondered this ethical dilemma, the funnier it had gotten. I imagined all the dogs which had been sold and all the dogs which were lost. He imagined them being sold on Saturday, lost in the woods during the week, and then lining up on the sides of the road, and waiting for the biscuit man to come by, and give them breakfast and a ride to their next adventure. Hitchhiking dogs? Now that is a funny thought. Christian's ever-resourceful grandfather had found yet another way to provide for his family in hard times. Christian and his cousin enjoyed sharing the memories and laughing about their beloved grandfather. Jerry said, "You know, Chris, Mama is getting older now. I know she misses Papa." That comment hit Christian hard, because it brought back his grandmother's words, "I just did not want to live without my husband, but I will live long enough to see your baby." Mama would join Papa very soon. Everyone at the reunion had enjoyed talking and eating and looking at old pictures, but it was time to go. They said their goodbyes and went on their way. Chapter 21. David McLeod had been thinking of the offer during his own trip home. He arrived at his Blue Ridge Mountain home in the late afternoon, but just in time for the weekly gathering of musicians on the front porch of the old general store. It was what we might call an open mic night, if they had a microphone. They did not, because this was mountain music at its very best. It would be performed in the traditional way, the acoustic way. There was a collection of guitar pickers, a mandolin, a fiddle, a banjo and a tambourine. Sometimes there would be a harmonica or maybe an upright bass. Anyone who wanted could join them, so David grabbed a couple of spoons and joined the rhythm section. They started out with a song which many considered had been the very first country song. It was called Reuben's Train. The song had no doubt originated from the old primitive Baptist tunes, which were typically done a cappella. The men who seldom if ever entered the house of worship would sit around outside, maybe a short distance away, and copy the melodies on their banjos, guitars and fiddles. They would add their own lyrics, and were not very popular with the faithful. The song started out, "Old Reuben made a train. He put it on a track. He ran it to Lord knows where." It ended with, "I got myself a blade and put old Reuben in the shade. I started me a graveyard of my own. Oh lordy me, oh lordy my. I started me a graveyard of my own." Then they played an old Carter family song called The Wildwood Flower. David and Christian had played it many times. Christian would blow it on the harmonica, and David would accompany him on the spoons. This music had begun in this place, the upper end of the beautiful Appalachians. The brave and fiercely independent people who first settled here faced hard lives in a sometimes unforgiving wilderness, but like Christian's grandfather's story about the trees, they faced the obstacles, and were still able to create music that would later build the city of Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville would make more than a few people very rich. It would also shatter many hopes and dreams as well. When David got to his parents' home, his mother met him at the door. "I got supper on the table, hope you are hungry." He was indeed. The food on the table would have looked very familiar to Christian, because some of the same people who settled here migrated all the way down to the southern end of the Appalachians where he was born. There on the table were leather breeches beans, made from green beans, which had been strung together in a ring, and hung on the south side of the smokehouse to dry. When they were ready to cook, they would be soaked and placed in a pot with some salt pork and cooked until they were tender. Also on the table were cornbread, country ham, buttermilk, and sorghum syrup. There were potatoes and gravy, along with homemade biscuits. A blackberry cobbler sitting beside the stove to cool would be dessert. David wished the mess sergeant back at the Marine base could take a few lessons from his mother. The family sat and ate supper, then moved over by the fire to talk and tell stories. Life was good. Home was good. Chapter 22. The 30 days had flown by for the three friends. They had all decided to participate in the project. Now it was time to get to work. Agent McLeod met them at the airport, and they drove to the lab. Agent McLeod introduced them to Dr. Manny Noya. Dr. Manny Noya was from Africa. He had been raised in a rural area where voodoo was common. Everyone in his village marveled at his intelligence. He had a special talent for communicating with animals. It was as if there was some type of invisible connection. Once when he was very small, maybe 4 years old, he had been playing near his family's hut. A lion came up and began stalking the boy. Akachi had not seen the lion until it was within a few feet of him. When their eyes met, Akachi stared into the lion's eyes and raised his hand. The lion lowered his gaze and crept away. No one else witnessed the confrontation, and Akachi wondered about the mystery. As it had been with Christian, Akachi had lived a normal life throughout his childhood. Then when he was about 17, he received a letter from the U.S. government. Akachi had an uncle who had become a U.S. citizen. He had filed papers requesting a student visa for Akachi. The boy was delighted. He was going to America to get an education. He wanted to be a doctor, so he could return to Africa and help his people. So far that dream had not materialized. Instead, he had received his student visa, received a scholarship, and excelled in his studies to the point of surpassing all prior scholastic achievements in the field of genetics. He was, in fact, a genius in genetics. In fact, in his dissertation he had done research which would have set the academic world on its ear, if it had been released. In a bizarre coincidence, Akachi's professor had been a colleague of Agent McLeod. When he realized the impact that the dissertation would certainly have on the world, he quickly made arrangements for Akachi and Agent McLeod to meet. Akachi received his doctorate and agreed to work with the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. The most shocking revelation of Dr. Manny Noya's research stemmed from the unlikely combination of three characteristics of the man himself. The first being his natural intelligence, the second being his cutting-edge research in genetics, and the third and final one being his work with state-of-the-art computer systems, especially in wireless technology. It was Dr. Manny Noya's research which would form the basis for the entire project in which Christian, Jeanette and David would be participating. It all started while Dr. Manny Noya was a boy. He was always studying something. One morning while following a group of bats back to their cave as they went to roost, Akachi had discovered a hidden entrance to a cave. He entered the opening in the rocks and there in an earthen jar, he discovered a crystal. He held the crystal in his hand, and as the light from the sun hit it, an image was projected against a rock cliff. He could see a series of connected dots arranged in a spiral. He had no way of knowing what it meant at the time, but as he looked through the crystal, he could not only see the image which had been projected, but he could actually move the connected dots from place to place. This experience frightened him so badly that he actually pondered throwing the crystal away. Instead, he kept it and tried to understand its meaning. It was not until he had completed his undergraduate studies in genetics and computer science that he realized the meaning of the image and the secret of manipulating the dots. He had been working in the genetics lab and using the computer to keep up with his data. He decided to remove the crystal from its hiding place and try to see the image again. The light from the morning sun was coming through the open window. As it shone through the crystal, the image was projected onto the wall. The telephone rang and interrupted him. He laid the crystal on the table. As he talked on the phone, he noticed that a fly had landed on the table. As the fly passed between the light and the crystal, another image was projected onto the wall. He could not believe what he was seeing. He quickly hung up the phone, took the crystal in his hand and held it so that the sunlight was reflecting from the side of his eye. What he then saw reflected on the wall was clearly DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, more specifically human DNA. In addition, he realized that when the fly had been between the light and the crystal, he had been looking at an image of the DNA of the fly. Then he remembered being able to manipulate the dots on the image when he had first found it. He could not understand what was happening, but was determined to either understand it or die trying. He continued to work on the dissertation for the next couple of months, using the computer and the crystal. What he discovered can only be described as the greatest discovery of all time. When he agreed to create this project with the CIA, for reasons which will be revealed later, it was necessary for the doctor to use the supercomputer which he had developed to search for the alignment of 3 compatible DNA patterns. He knew which patterns to look for by another revelation. That revelation was directly connected to 3 individuals. Those individuals were Christian, Jeanette, and David. Was this just coincidence? There is no such thing. Chapter 23. Agent McLeod said, "I will leave you 3 with the good doctor, this stuff hurts my head." "Good luck." Dr. Manny Noya began, "Let's start with an overview of my work to date. Please hold your questions until I am finished. This will not be easy due to the complex nature of my theories." The doctor then related the story of his finding the crystal and discovering that it had certain functions. He explained that it was not what one might describe as natural, but was instead intelligently designed. He continued, "The theory as it stands today is as follows: the crystal is activated primarily by light, but also by sound. We assume that the crystal is not the only one of its kind. It seems unlikely that only one would be formed. The crystal's function is to project a DNA sequence, however it does respond differently to different DNA. As I studied the crystal, I discovered that it not only projects images, but also can interact with an individual through vibrations. In other words, it acts in a similar fashion to wireless communications. The difference is that the sequence can be altered without actually touching the individual. A major revelation occurred when I was able to preload a sequence image to the computer. This process allowed a multi-directional communication link. Further research and testing allowed the images to be both layered one on the other. Through testing, another surprising discovery was revealed. Once the image had been manipulated, it was then passed on to the next generation. The downside of the research was that it was limited, because we think that the crystal was created for a specific DNA image. In other words, the crystal is incomplete because we have not been able to match it to a specific individual. The closest we can get to a match is the DNA of the MacLeod family. After an extensive search of databases, we discovered a link between the three of you. The only practical explanation for this, if we rule out coincidence, is that something somewhere is assisting us in our efforts. One thing is certain, the discoveries we have made so far have been both ancient yet much more advanced than any technology we have yet been able to replicate. The other really interesting factor is what I refer to as the dream link. I myself have had lucid dreams which later played out in the real world. Christian and Jeanette, in one of my dreams, I had a vision of the diamond necklaces which hang about your necks. We will need to study them in order to determine what part they play in the mystery. I have also developed an interface for the computer, which allows for a direct wireless connection to the crystal. This functions by using the natural frequency or vibration of the crystal itself. I am looking forward to working with each of you. Any questions? MacLeod asked, Doctor, are you saying that one of my ancestors owned the crystal that you found in the cave? Dr. Manny Noya replied, the evidence certainly points in that direction. Jeanette asked, are you saying that my diamond and Christians are somehow related to the crystal? Precisely, said the doctor. Christian asked, just how do you intend to determine these things? The doctor replied, I do not have all the answers. We will seek them together. I will tell you that we have only just begun to understand a few of the mysteries. We will continue to make progress, I am sure. Jeanette asked, what is the next step? Dr. Manny Noya replied, I believe the answer lies within the three of you. I want you to spend some time together and experiment on your own. As I mentioned before, I believe that there has to be some kind of connection with a higher form of being. Someone or something had to design the crystal and the diamonds. I only hope that you will be able to make some type of contact. I believe we need to try meditation. I have not told this story before, but when I was a child, I had an encounter with a lion. The doctor described the encounter and asked if anyone had experienced anything like that before. David said that he had not, but both Jeanette and Christian said that they had. They did not go into detail, because they were not sure of the doctor's motives. Dr. Manny Noya said, find a location close to where you experienced the most contact with the creatures of the earth. Go there and see what happens. The three friends decided to go to the Portavine house. Chapter 24. The old house needed quite a bit of repair, so they set about doing just that. They decided that David would move in, and Christian and Jeanette would stay with Christian's grandmother. David accompanied them to Christian's grandmother's house. He would spend the night in the spare bedroom. Mama Rosetta was feeling well and welcomed the company. She missed her husband John Jacob more than words could tell. She was in good physical condition, but seemed to have lost some of her joy of life since her husband's death. She had prepared a wonderful meal of chicken and dumplings, green beans, baked apples and cornbread. After supper they talked about old times. Mama Rosetta recounted many of the stories of her youth. Christian enjoyed hearing them again. David and Jeanette enjoyed hearing them for the first time. She did tell one story that Christian had never heard. It was the story of her mother. She began, Christian, I never told you about my mother. She was a very independent woman, especially for her time. I know you have visited her grave over in western Alabama. It is in the same little town where your mother was born. Do you remember the first time you visited the cemetery with your mother and me? Christian said that he did. His grandmother continued, well, you were just old enough to read. You asked me why my mother had such an unusual middle name. I told you that my mother had been very proud of her maiden name, and had insisted that when she died, it would be on her headstone. So, the headstone reads Melvin E. McBrayer Taylor. I was delighted to meet your friend David, not just because he seems to be a delightful young man, but also because of his name. There is an ancient connection between the McBrayer and the MacLeod clans. If you look back far enough, you will find a link. There is a very old story about our clans. It has to do with some type of oracle. It is my hope that you will somehow be able to reconnect with wisdom, which has been lost. Mama Rosetta gave them all hugs, said good night, and went off to her room. Christian noticed that she had given him an unusually long hug, and kissed him on the forehead like she used to do when he was a child. Everyone went off to bed, and in the morning they awoke to the rooster's crow. Christian was the first one to awake. He sensed that something was wrong. Every other morning he had awakened in this house since he could remember. He had smelled the wonderful aroma of his grandmother's biscuits baking on the wood stove. This morning was different. He went to his grandmother's room. He called out to her softly, but she did not respond. When he got to her bedside, he touched her gently. His fears were confirmed. His beloved grandmother had gone to join her husband. She had apparently just gone to sleep and passed from this life peacefully. It was an appropriate way for such a good soul to depart. Chapter 25. There had to be at least 500 people at the funeral. More than half were family. Mama Rosetta Baggett was laid to rest in the churchyard beside her beloved husband. On the way back from the funeral, Christian thought about how much he loved his grandmother. He thought of the love that she had given to so many. She would be sorely missed by all. It had been 3 days since her passing, and the couple had spent those with his parents. Now it was time to go back to his grandparents' house. Christian's parents, Christian and Jeanette, went there to distribute the few belongings that Rosetta had left. She had made it known which items would be left to her children and grandchildren. Among her belongings was a small jewelry box. Inside the box with her jewelry, they found an envelope. It was addressed to Christian and Jeanette. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. The note simply said, "Ask the crow." Christian was a bit confused, but Jeanette was not. She knew exactly what the message meant. Christian's mother was the heir to the house, and invited Christian and Jeanette to live there as long as they wished. The couple had moved their belongings to storage after his honorable discharge from the Marine Corps. They were happy to have a place to live, while they decided on their next course of action. Christian asked, "Jeanette, do you know what this message means?" She replied, "Yes, I will tell you when the time is right." "What does that mean?" he asked. She replied, "Tomorrow night is the full moon. We need to go to the Portavine house and visit with David." The following night they arrived at the Portavine house at around sunset. David was happy to see them, and had gotten the house in pretty good shape considering the years of neglect. There was a fire in the fireplace and coffee on the stove. They told David about the note, and they discussed the meaning. Jeanette revealed the conversation she had with the crow, and Christian recalled his experiences with the crow at the store and at the cafe. David thought, "I have heard of the horse whisperer and the dog whisperer, but here I am with a couple of people who talk with crows." He had, however, experienced enough in the past year to keep him from discounting anything that might happen around these two. They talked and visited. David and Christian told Marine Corps stories until midnight. He thought about crows, and then recalled the poems of Edgar Allan Poe. He pondered the poem about the raven, and remembered that it was about a raven talking to a man. He wondered if it were simply Mr. Poe's imagination, or perhaps more. Suddenly they heard a tapping sound coming from the window. They went to investigate, and there at the window was a crow. Jeanette recognized her old friend Jose immediately. She exclaimed, "Jose, is that you?" She opened the window, and the crow flew in and perched on her shoulder. She perceived the message from the crow in the same fashion as before. She could hear him speak, but not with her ears. It was as before, as if the crow was inside her head. She looked at Christian and David and said, "Jose has a message for us." David said, "Jose?" Jeanette replied, "Sorry, I should have told you. This crow is called Jose." "You know the crow's name how?" asked Christian. "Just listen," she replied. "We are to put the diamonds and the crystal together." When they touched the stones together, there was a bright flash, and the crystal had become instantly transformed into a diamond. The crow spoke first. This time the voice was audible. He said, "Now at last, the circle is complete. You must join me on a journey." David, who was still in shock, asked, How the hell are we going to join you? Are you going to walk, or are we going to fly? The crow began to laugh and said, You have no idea what is about to happen to you. Before anyone could speak, 2 more crows arrived. David and Christian, these are your spirit guides. Now it is time to go, said the crow. David asked, How do we get there? Oh, I can get us there real fast, replied the crow. Jeanette, Christian, and David were instantly aware that they were inside the crows and looking down at their bodies, which were sitting motionless in their places. The 3 were flying with the crows, or as the crows. It was both confusing and at the same time thrilling. They flew out the open window and straight into the air. As they ascended to an unbelievable height, they began to level off. There was a flash of light and a loud pop. They then started to glide back to earth. Instead of seeing Ball Play Swamp, they were landing on the branches of a huge oak tree. Below them they saw a village. Jeanette became aware that she was not occupying the crow's body alone. She was simply being allowed to use the eyes and ears of the bird, to allow her to witness whatever it was that she was now witnessing. She heard a third voice. It was Christian. David heard them all. It was now quite clear. They could all communicate with each other through their thoughts. Jose said, We have entered another dimension of time and space. You are looking at a meeting of the Druid priest and the leader of the MacLeod clan. David said, I remember this place from my dream. Christian said, Yes, they are saying the same things you told me about. Jose said, Patience. About that time, the Druid emerged from the hut and started down the steep path. Jose said, Come, we must follow. The crows flew above and alongside the Druid until they reached a spot about a mile from the hut. There were no other dwellings here. The Druid sat down at a crossing of 2 trails. Christian thought, This is a crossroads. The crows perched on a tree limb just above the Druid's head. To their surprise, the Druid looked up and spoke to them. I have been expecting you. There are many things I must tell you. As with every living creature, you are connected. The 3 of you are connected in a very unique way. Not only are you connected by blood from a common ancestor, but you are connected in a mystic and magic way as well. Because of the current limitations of your human brains, you will not yet be able to understand all of what I am about to reveal. Do not worry about that part. Just remember the words. Although time as you perceive it does not exist, it will be possible only for you to think of it in that way. This is necessary for reasons which will later be revealed when you have progressed to that level of understanding. Consider first the vastness of what you refer to as the universe. Your scientists are devoting a great deal of time trying to decide the best method of transporting a human body to the vast and distant corners of the universe. This is absurd. It will never happen. Understand that the civilization you know is not old. There were many generations before you. Remember, you will not yet be able to put any of this in a real-time idea. You are only capable of limited understanding for reasons which will be understood only in another dimension. Long before the place you call Atlantis sank into the ocean, and even longer before it rose out of the ocean, many generations of billions of galaxies who came before you in the universe existed. Do not attempt to ponder the beginning of the universe. You will not be able to comprehend. You are now at a crossroads of the universe. Beware and heed this warning. There are evil ones who fought a war with the good. This war is not over in every dimension. Evil is alive. You will soon be able to recognize it. The doctor who is working with you now has been carefully selected for his great intelligence. He will be able to help us reach our goal, but he must not know everything. Only share the things that the ancient ones tell you to share. Know that man is not the original inhabitants of this earth. The animals are the original inhabitants. They will guide you. Every person has a spirit animal. Yours is the crow. Listen to them. In the early days of this planet, the native peoples understood this, but they required mind-altering drugs in order to accomplish what you have already accomplished. The reason for this was that their minds required it. The laws of the earth are such that everything is made up of light and darkness. In the same way that coal becomes a diamond and crystals become diamonds, darkness becomes light. Humans are hybrids in a way which you now would find nearly impossible to comprehend. They are not the native creatures of this planet. I mentioned that it is absurd for humans to think about traversing the universe. This is because you are tethered to your physical bodies. The reason for this is that it is a means, and only a means of sustaining life. Travel between stars, planets and dimensions can only be accomplished by what you term as virtual. This is not to say that it is not real. It is real. It is just not physical. The doctor will embark on a journey with you. This journey will bring both understanding as well as the means to be victorious over evil. You will steer him in this direction. Do not share the knowledge you received today. He needs to provide the means. I will tell you only that it will originate with his combining the DNA-altering qualities of the diamonds with the technology of silicon. You will return now and continue your work. At this, the crows took flight, and the three were again at the Portavine house. Chapter 26. The next day the three returned to the lab, and Dr. Manny Noya greeted them. "Are we ready to continue?" he asked. Christian replied, "We have never been more ready. Let's get on with it." Dr. Manny Noya told them that he had been pursuing some additional research regarding diamonds and computer interfaces. He had written some computer script, which allowed him to establish a better scanning interface between the diamonds and the computer. It was wireless and worked on principles of light and sound. Dr. Manny Noya continued, "David, I would like for you to assist me in this project, and Christian, I need you and Jeanette to give me an update on your progress." David said, "I am ready when you are. Let's get started." Christian said, "Jeanette and I have gained a great deal of insight into the workings of the diamonds, but first you should know that a strange thing has occurred. The crystal that MacLeod is wearing has become a diamond as well." "That is fascinating. Continue with your comments," replied the doctor. Christian continued, "After the crystal changed into a diamond, we were able to actually enter the bodies of our spirit animals and see through their eyes. They did not share any other part of their adventure." Dr. Manny Noya contemplated this for some time before saying, "Excellent development. Here is what I would like for you to do now. David, you will remain here with me. Christian and Jeanette, I would like for the two of you to go and visit your relatives in New Orleans, and then go and visit the lady in Alabama." "What is her name?" "You mean Miss Hattie?" asked Christian. The doctor replied, "Yes, Miss Hattie." MacLeod remained with the doctor, and Christian and Jeanette left the next morning for New Orleans. Chapter 27. David MacLeod arrived early the next morning. Dr. Manny Noya was already at work completing some code. He said, "David, I have something to show you. I have been trying to complete the code for the wireless interface for the NIMI." David asked, "What is NIMI?" Dr. Manny Noya replied, "It is an acronym for deoxyribonucleic acid electronic manipulation interface. It will allow the computer to interface wirelessly with the diamond. The only possible glitch will be how it will react now that the crystal has been transformed to diamond. The first thing I want to try is the DNA scan without the computer. If you recall, I was able to manipulate the DNA with my mind. I did not dare move the molecules from their positions and leave them there. I was afraid of the consequences. That is where we need the power of the computer." David was fired up and ready to go. He said, "Let's do this thing." "Very well," declared Dr. Manny Noya. "Have a seat here beside the open window." David sat beside the open window, and the doctor held the diamond at an angle between David's left eye and the blank wall. Sure enough, an image appeared to be projected on the wall. "Excellent," exclaimed Dr. Manny Noya. "Do you see an image? Now I would like for you to move the dot which is located to the far left upper corner." David could indeed see an image. He focused his eyes on the selected dot, and as he moved his eyes downward, the dot followed. He informed the doctor, and Dr. Manny Noya told him to reposition the dot and close his eyes. When he had done this, the doctor removed the diamond. When David described the experience, the doctor commented, "This is excellent. Now we can move to the next level." "What is the next level?" David asked. Dr. Manny Noya replied, "Excellent question. The next level will involve integrating your DNA with an exact image of your DNA, which has been stored on the computer hard drive. This will back up any manipulated images and synchronize not only with the computer, but also with an image in the cloud." "The cloud?" asked David. The doctor continued, "Yes, we are so far ahead of the curve with technology, it will take a few years for the rest of the world to catch up. Let me give you a little preview. In the not-so-distant future, there will be a multitude of changes which will occur. The general public will be able to interact with each other in very interesting ways. By the year 2012, almost everyone will communicate via wireless computer networks and handheld devices. My goal is to bring these innovations along. I want to take this as far as we are able. In regards to the matter at hand, I wish only to probe the possibilities. My work to date has centered on developing an interface which will allow the complete integration of the human brain, but with the data processing power of the silicon chip." Again puzzled, David asked, "What does silicon have to do with it?" The doctor replied, "That is another excellent question. Life on this planet, and presumably other planets as well, is carbon-based. Virtual life on the computer is silicon-based. They are currently completely separate. What I propose is a combination of the two. Life as we know it today is limited to the lifespan of the organism. If we could find a way to combine carbon life forms with silicon virtual life forms, there would no longer be any limitation of lifespan. It would become irrelevant." David said, "Now my head is hurting." Chapter 28. During the visit in New Orleans, Jeanette had spent her time visiting with Sally and Marie. They taught her many things about hoodoo practices and how the elements of the earth can be combined with certain chants in order to influence different aspects of an individual's life. They had enjoyed visiting the city again and left with a better understanding of how the human race fits in with the rest of the world. Now it was time to return to their home in Ball Place Swamp. Jeanette recalled Marie's words, "Return to the Portavine house and talk to the crow." Christian and Jeanette arrived and visited with family before going to the Portavine house, and wondered what new adventure or challenge faced them. The crow waited. He was perched on the gable roof of the house when they arrived. He greeted them in his native tongue, "Caw caw caw." Jeanette began to speak to the crow, "Jose, we have been discussing the events of the past few weeks and Christian and I are unsure about Dr. Manny Noya's real motives. We are not sure he can be trusted. We have no real basis for these fears, but we have not known him long enough to be sure. Can you give us any wisdom?" The crow gave them a sideways look and began to laugh. "I cannot, but I know who can. They are very suspicious lot. I will have to talk to them first, and ask them if they will allow you to accompany them to the fire of the fox." Before they could inquire further, the crow flew straight up into the air and disappeared. Jeanette asked, "Christian, what in the world is the fire of the fox?" Christian replied, "The only thing I can think of is a foxfire. My grandfather spoke of them, but I have never seen one. He said that they were very rare. I did some research on them but could not find any information. My grandfather described them as being found in a circle on the ground, on very dark summer nights deep in the woods. The foxfire consists of a pulsating glow resembling a fire which has burned to embers." "Who or what do you suppose the crow is going to visit?" asked Jeanette. "It is almost dark and there is no moon. I hope Jose can find his way back before it is too dark for him to see how to fly." Just as the last glow from the sun was disappearing, the crow returned. He said, "It took all my persuasive powers to get them to agree." Jeanette asked, "To get whom to agree?" Jose threw back his head and shouted, "The wolves!" Christian asked, "What do we do now?" The crow replied, "Go to the place where you last saw the wolves many years ago. They will be waiting there." The couple arrived at the spot beside the house where Christian had been born. It was where his cousins had left him in the wagon when he was a child, the same place where the wolves had frightened his mother. There, sitting quietly in the dark, were 6 wolves. Christian said, "If they want us to follow them, how will we be able to keep up in the dark?" Suddenly a large white wolf walked slowly toward them. He reared up with his front feet on Christian's chest. With his left front paw, he touched the diamond which hung from Christian's neck. Christian said, "Jeanette, I think he is indicating that we should use our diamonds to meditate. Perhaps we can enter the wolves in the same way as we entered the crows." They knelt on the ground and began to meditate. Instantly they were able to see in the darkness, but the most shocking thing was that they could now smell everything. They realized that they had become one with the wolves. In an instant, they were running wildly through the underbrush as if we're not even there. They were running on either side of the big white wolf. They ran for a long distance, maybe 6 or 7 miles. They broke into a small clearing, and the wolves stopped in front of glowing, pulsating embers which were arranged in a circle on the ground. The wolves began to howl. What Christian and Jeanette heard was a song unlike any either had heard before. It still was the sound of the wolves, but now they could understand the words. The wolves were calling out to someone or something. The howls continued for what seemed like hours. It stopped as quickly as it had begun. As they gazed at the foxfire through the eyes of the wolves, they began to see a shape forming. The shape seemed to swirl around as the light pulsated. Then they recognized it. It was the spirit of the druid. The spirit hovered over the foxfire and began to speak. "So we meet again. You have doubts about someone. I know this because otherwise the wolves would not have brought us together. What questions do you have?" Christian replied, "We do not know if we can trust Dr. Maninoya." The druid replied, "His heart is clean. This one you can trust. Beware of the others." Christian and Jeanette were immediately returned to their own bodies, and found themselves alone and on their knees. Neither spoke immediately, but just gazed into one another's eyes. Christian turned to Jeanette and said, "Wow, that was too cool. I wonder if I can do that with the hounds. Let's go back now and get an early start in the morning. I am anxious to really get to work on this." Jeanette replied, "Are we not going to see Miss Hattie?" Christian said, "I would love to see her, but we will be coming back soon enough. She was not expecting us anyway, and I have a feeling that we may have more to tell her later." When they reached the lab, Dr. Maninoya and David were already at work. Dr. Maninoya said, "Welcome back. We have made remarkable progress concerning the power of the diamond. It appears that the transformation from crystal to diamond had positive effects. I am now more convinced than ever that the diamonds are the product of a highly advanced civilization. They seem to be pre-programmed to interact with the computer network. I employed a sniffer to detect any invisible connection between the computer and the diamond. There is definitely a connection using what is known as artificial intelligence to communicate. I say artificial intelligence, but actually it seems to go well beyond that. The fact is that the diamond is reprogramming the computer. It is my theory that this communication can function as well, or even better on a network on the cloud in the ether." David said, "There you go again, Doc. You should know that we are not as bright as you. What the hell are you talking about, and may we have it in English?" The doctor commented, "Funny you should say that, David. English is precisely the point. First of all, remember what I told you earlier about the coming technology, which will become available to the general population. I told you that most people by the year 2012 will have personal computers and handheld communication devices in their homes, and that these devices will operate wirelessly. They will be connected to each other in previously unimaginable ways. That will be truly remarkable, but nothing compared to what we will be able to achieve. Oh, I almost forgot my point. The reason English is important is that it allows the creation of words better than any other language. This idiosyncrasy greatly enhanced the British Empire's ability to rule the world. Back to my original thought, it is my belief that with the aid of the Ethernet we might be able to place the diamonds in such a fashion to allow triangulation. Oh yes, in English that means that the three of you would be not only connected to each other, but also to the rest of the world through the Ethernet." Christian commented, "So, you are calling this the Ethernet?" Dr. Maninoya replied, "Yes, sorry, I should have made that a bit clearer. Because the connection is invisible and seems to have no loss of functionality based on proximity, we could better cover the globe directionally. The reason we would do this has nothing to do with communication with each other. It is to enhance interstellar communication." Jeanette said, "So, are you saying that we will not only be connected to each other, but also to the rest of the universe?" "That is the idea," replied Dr. Maninoya. "The diamonds would be placed near the equator, and at 3 equally spaced longitudes. David asked, "That all seems very interesting and exciting, but what does that have to do with genetics?" Dr. Manny Noya replied, "That is a short question which requires a very long answer. For now, I have a much more interesting question for the 3 of you. Have you ever tasted Jamaican jerk chicken? If you are hungry, it will fill you up and give you a nice burn, and if you are not hungry, it will keep you from getting that way. Let's eat, I am starving. We can begin with that very long answer first thing in the morning." Chapter 29. The meal was traditional Jamaican. It was very close to Dr. Manny Noya's mother's meals, which she had prepared for him as a child growing up in Africa. The next morning, as promised, came the long answer to the short question. The doctor began his answer. "In the past, there have been many ways in which humans have attempted to connect the virtual world with the physical one. For example, the traditional shamans were used as intercessory connections. The traditional way was to use some type of organic herb or drug, mostly hallucinogens. This was necessary because of deficiencies in human DNA. It is my belief that we will be able to make the connection by continuing the work of the ancients. I believe that we will be able to take the diamonds and use them to alter the DNA of the species, bringing us closer to our natural origins. There have already been some mutations which have occurred in some families like the Portvines, the Baggots, the McBrayers and the McLeods. It is curious that these occurred mostly in Western Europe. Another oddity is the natural ability which exists in my own DNA. It seems to be somehow separated from yours. We will pursue answers to these questions as the project continues. In addition to the connection which was established by the shamans, there were also attempts by other cultures using voodoo, which developed into hoodoo by the introduction of European witchcraft, African voodoo and Native American shamanism. However, the most curious to me is the connection that music, rhythmic chants and song brings to the equation. I can only surmise that certain vital factors of human DNA respond to these frequencies. Every organism vibrates at a certain frequency, and everyone is affected by these sounds. Further, all elements of this world also vibrate at their own frequency. This explains how the crystals and other minerals, especially diamonds, can have the effect. If we take a closer look at the legends of the past, I think we will get a better understanding of this phenomenon. Since the beginning of time for our species on Earth and even before our time, creatures have always communicated audibly. To give you a few examples, birds sing in order to form the DNA of their offspring. If the song is not exactly right, the mating process will not occur. Therefore, the actual result is in fact controlling the DNA of the particular species. I am sure that you can think of many examples of this. If we examine our own legends, we will quickly see examples of the effects of music and song on our own life forms. There is a reason why men have told of the angels singing. If music and song did not play a major role in the development of our species, why would these legends exist at all? It is my belief that they would not. In fact, the legends must have some basis in fact. Jeanette, the spirit or virtual being which inhabited your own body, was a perfect example of legend becoming fact. By this I am referring to Homer's poem The Odyssey. Remember the sirens? They were female forms which attracted sailors with their hypnotic songs. We do not know their purpose other than to attract the men for whatever reason. Perhaps it allowed them to use the ones with the desired DNA to alter their own offspring. In your case, it was intended to allow you to find your perfect mate. I will not make the long answer longer by listing more examples, because I think you get the idea. The more important point is that we take action to move this project forward. I believe that we can alter the DNA of the species by creating this interface, which will take us another step toward the ultimate salvation of the human species, and at the same time help secure the future of the planet. This is crucial because we are currently using up our natural resources at an alarming rate. In conclusion, we will attempt to perpetuate the future of our planet by moving toward the integration of carbon-based life and silicon-based life in order to create a new virtual world. This will seem very foreign to you at first because of your physical bodies. They are in fact only vessels which temporarily house the virtual beings we call souls. Please remember that this is not as opposed to current spiritual beliefs, as it may sound on the surface. We cannot know the ultimate plan of the Creator. In the beginning, we were given the basic information we needed in order to gain an understanding. It is no different now. We have always possessed free will. One caution is that if we accept that we are meant to move forward with the plan of the Creator, we must remember that if we accept some legends as truth, we must not discount the traditional cautions of our teachers. We especially should be aware that there are forces which we have known as evil. These can be deceptive, and we should be careful. My hope is that we will trust the intuition which is a part of us. I will need to make a report to Agent McLeod soon. I intend to be guarded in this effort. I believe he can be trusted. However, I am not sure about his superiors. I will arrange for the diamonds to be positioned. I will do this with Colonel Keller's help. We will use the Marines to transport and safeguard the diamonds. I can think of no one else with their level of devotion to duty and loyalty. Chapter 30. After the diamonds were in position, Dr. Manny Noya and David established a connection, and the project continued. Several desired DNA sequences were replicated in the memory of the main server. They were then tested on a variety of insect specimens. The findings were conclusive. DNA could not only be virtualized, but could be passed on to the next generations. This meant that there could be a direct connection between the virtual world and the natural world. Dr. Manny Noya called the group together and explained, "What this means is that the three of you will provide the blueprint for the subsequent generations. It is my belief that this was the original plan for this planet, but somehow got disrupted many ages before our time. The diamonds are the key to the continuation of this plan. We will need to be extremely cautious in our endeavors, so as not to upset the harmony of the existing world. I am convinced that the original plan for the universe was to colonize the planet, and have as its original inhabitants, the animals of this world. What we are seeing is the results of the powers of darkness, and not the plan of the Creator. No existing human leadership can be trusted." Christian asked, "How does this affect our work with the government?" "We must not tip our hand to them. We will let them continue to believe that we are working toward their military agenda, but we will carry out our plan to protect this planet, so it can eventually be returned to its original owners," replied Dr. Manny Noya. Jeanette asked, "Does that mean the ultimate extinction of the human race?" The doctor replied, "Not in our lifetimes or even for many generations to come. However, we as a race in our present form will disappear from this place, but not from the universe. You must understand that this planet is only a temporary home for our present life forms. I am convinced that the crows are still our connection with the real world. We will use them to accomplish our tasks. We desperately need to get some insight into the future. I want you to go and visit Miss Hattie and find out everything you can about hoodoo. I believe that the answer to seeing into alternative futures lies within the past. Talk to both Miss Hattie and to her husband Will. Try to make a connection which will explain the past and see into the future. We will proceed based on your findings concerning the future as it exists now, and as well as possible, alternate futures based on our intervention." Chapter 31. Once again the three journeyed to the Ball Play swamp, and Miss Hattie's house. As usual, Miss Hattie greeted them at the door, and was delighted to see them. They told her of their work, and asked her to tell them as much as she could about the past and the future. The old lady lit her pipe and began to speak. "You young folks sure must want to spend a lot of time with Miss Hattie and Uncle Will. We are not used to so much attention. Most people just ignore us until they need a wart talked off. I will do my best to tell you what I know, and what I think. I believe that we humans are visitors here. We are not meant to stay on this earth. Oh, we have to now because we are connected to our bodies. I like to think of it in terms of the earth giving birth. Think of the earth as our mother. The big difference is that the carry-in time be long time. We needs our bodies now to house our spirits, until we are growed enough to survive outside of them. Think of it as multiple births, not twins or triplets but billions of bodies each holding millions of souls. Tay's lots of peoples out there carrying lots of beliefs that they is sure is right. What most don't know is that the spirit and flesh always be opposing each other. Our nature make us afraid to die. Truth is death be you a passin' to th next life. It show nuff be natural to be afraid of death and pain. We all gots ta bearth pain to pass on our nature to th children, and they children's children. These be feelings, won't make no difference. Can't change what's meant to be. We all be parts of the same ting. Catholics say, the bread becomes the body of Christ and the wine becomes the blood. This is a means by which humans can attempt to understand dem mysteries. Some people believes and some don't. Look at it this way, the reason Jesus chose bread is because it is a thing, which is one thing. It be bread. Bread be made out of lots of things. It be lots of grains o' wheat but one bread. Same way, load of grapes but one wine. Dat th way bread and wine be body and blood of Jesus. Ain't no accident. Creator made dat mystery ta make all of us one ting. All dis make us grow together as one. This world just be a stop at the crossroads, den we gots to go on. Jesus be a teacher. Other aspects of the life of Christ. The Creator sent us Jesus as a teacher, a pattern for us to see th future. He didn't get here th same way as th rest of us. Nah. The Spirit be his daddy. He growed to be a man like every other, except he don't got no sin. Sin be strange. Sin bring you in communion with the dark or evil side. The evil spirits wants us to stay down here and not move on up. They wants to rule dis old world and us with it. Ain't no future there. Our only hope be in de spirit, not de flesh. What I be sayin' is dat, Jesus growed up, and he be a carpenter like his stepdaddy. Why you reckon he done dat? I tell you why. A carpenter uses his skills to take something like a tree dat lives in the flesh, cut it down, and use the flesh or wood as de means to build a table dat stand for 1,000 years. All these things meant to help us understand the future of dis world and of us all. That tell us how to tell the future. You gots ta read de past. The Bible always lead us from flesh to spirit. Flesh rot away but de spirit live on forever. Ain't just Christians what believe all dis. Other folks believe bout de same but look at it in they own way. One thing be pretty common wid all peoples. Most believes in free will. We can choose. Now, don't be afraid of de peoples what believes in reincarnation. Ain't no reason to be afraid, cause when you thinks about it, dat the way de world work anyway. Plants and animals be born they die then they come again. All of us seem to have lost ourselves. We gots disconnected from de past. We done forgot our history. We gots a veil over our eyes. We needs to use de tools to help us bridge de gap. Tie be earthly things what gives us de power. You know de power of de diamonds. I gonna tell you some mo. We uses frankincense and myrrh in our mojos. Show wouldn't have been give to de baby Jesus if they didn't have de power. Another way in which we can connect with the spirit world is like my husband people do. We can use the animals to help. You told me dat you already done dis. Don't forget the power of the music. Music be strong juju. It was not so many years ago dat Dr. Martin Luther King stood on the steps at the National Mall and gave his I Have a Dream speech. Don't forget dem three peoples Peter, Paul and Mary stood beside him and sung the words of their song which helped to change the world. Do you remember the words? Went like dis, how many roads must a man walk down before they call him a man? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Finally, the other way ta make the connection and see the future as the location. By dat I mean where you is. Maybe you be at the crossroads, they be a mystical place for show. Best thing I can say is, go back to the crossroads and use music to make a connection. Seek the help of the druid. Use the crow. Chapter 32. As the trio arrived at Moon's Song Cafe, they were greeted with a smile and a hug from Miss Lois. She said, "Y'all come in. It's been too long since I have seen you. Who is this fine-looking young man?" That is my old Marine buddy David McLeod, said Christian. Miss Lois said, I have heard a lot about you. Welcome to Moon Song Cafe. Do you sing or play? David replied, I love music. I have been known to join in with a pair of spoons. About that time, Curtis Shull walked in the door and said, What's happening tonight, Miss Lois? Same thing that happens every Saturday night, she replied. Make yourself at home. Danny will be doing his songwriter's night tonight. It is open mic tonight. So if you have any songs, jump on up there and let's hear them. Curtis tuned up and went to the stage. He said, Come on up, Christian, and bring your friend. I have a song I wrote. You have never heard it, so you should have no problem keeping up. Curtis loved to do that to Christian, and Christian didn't mind. He loved the challenge of playing songs he had never heard. Curtis began to sing, I'm sittin' in a barroom sippin' Long Island iced tea. Ye sittin' in a barroom sipping Long Island iced tea. Thinkin' 'bout my baby wonderin' why she walked out on me. It was a classic 12-bar blues song, and Christian made it through the harmonica break, while David played along on the spoons. The crowd seemed to like it as well. The next singer was a friend of theirs by the name of Ray Vaughan. Everybody called him Sleazy Ray. He sang a song that he had written with his friend downtown Grover Brown. It was called Won't See Love Here No More. It went something like this, Woke up this morning with blues on my mind, just starin' out the door with my baby on my mind. Just thinkin' 'bout my baby. Won't see love here. Won't see love here no more. Jeanette asked Miss Lois, Why is this place so magical? She replied, Child, that is a good question. I wish I had a good answer. All I can tell you is that it has always been that way. Danny Moon was on the stage now singing a song he wrote called Mask. It was appropriate, because it was about appearances not being what they seemed. Christian asked if they might stay after the cafe closed. Miss Lois didn't even hesitate. You are welcome to spend the night if you want, just lock the door when you leave. David, Christian, and Jeanette were sitting around the table talking. It was 11:30 when they heard a tapping on the window. Jeanette went to the door and opened it. The old crow named Jose flew into the room. Christian thought about asking how he knew to be there, but then decided not to. The crow began to speak. I have come alone because only one of you will go on the journey with me tonight. Christian said, I will go. The crow replied, No, you will not. The things which are to be revealed tonight are for Jeanette only. David looked at Christian and said, Looks like me and you will be going to catch some catfish tonight. Christian laughed and said, I do not know if I will be able to concentrate on fishing tonight. David replied, Why? Because you will be worried about Jeanette. No, I am afraid my terrible thirst will prevent me from thinking about fishing. David said, I have cold beer in my truck. Christian countered with, Well, in that case, I would love to go fishing. Jeanette said, You two will never change. That is the trouble with men and women in this world. We women marry you men thinking you will change, and you men marry us women thinking we won't. You just be here when I get back. Christian said, You can sit in the truck. You won't be in your body anyway. Then he thought, This is creepy even for us. The three of them piled in the truck with Jeanette in the middle. In a flash, Jeanette's spirit was inside the crow, as Jose flew straight up into the air. The men arrived at their old fishing spot, and set up their rods and reels in the customary fashion. Christian had a horrible thought. What will we tell the game warden if he comes by and sees Jeanette just sitting in the truck? David replied, Just tell him she is drunk. It ain't like she will be driving. Christian replied, We might be better off if she was. David said, We will be out of beer long before we decide to leave. It is not even likely that we would see anybody out here anyway. It ain't exactly like New York. The men had designed the perfect tools for night fishing. They consisted of metal pipes which had been cut at an angle, so they could be struck into the soft ground on the riverbank. The hooks were baited with fresh chicken livers, and the bait was tossed out into the stream. The rods were then placed in the holders. On the ends of the rods were small bells which were held in place by little clips. This way they could sit, talk, and drink beer while they fished. When they got a bite, the bells would ring, and they could haul in the fish. They had caught several fish and consumed several beers. Suddenly, the bell on David's rod began to ring rapidly. Before he could grab the rod, it jumped straight up and out of its holder. It flew through the air and landed in the middle of the stream and sank. David pushed the ball cap back on his head, settled back against the tree and said, "Chris, hand me another beer?" Christian grinned, handed David a beer and said, "I wonder how Jeanette is doing." David replied, "I would be more worried about everyone else." The two men laughed. Chapter 33. The Druid sat under the oak tree. On his right sat the creature. On his left was a dragon muzzled and chained. The crow landed on a low-hanging branch. As usual, the conversation was a monologue. The Druid began speaking, "I have summoned you alone in order to share the master plan of the Creator. You will keep these secrets. The creature on my right should be familiar to you. It is the creature which inhabited your body. It is a virtual beast as am I, and so is the dragon on my left. We as you are creations. This does not mean that we are not real. We are all as real as any other creature on the earth, or even anywhere else in the universe. You represent the natural earth. The earth is the mother of all her creatures, but you are as well. Many eons ago, as Earth time goes, there was established a colony. The purpose of this colony was to populate this planet. A civilization was created by manipulating the DNA of the intelligent land creatures which lived here before. All humans were descended from this one female creature. She was the mother of all creation. Her child was fathered by the father of all creation. There was a great battle just as it was described in the book you call the Bible. The forces of evil represented by the dragon struck a blow to the forces of good on the earth. The civilization which had been established was nearly destroyed. Your ancestors called it Atlantis. The entire continent sank below the waves in what you know as the Atlantic. Most of the inhabitants and most of the infrastructure were lost. We had to try to find a link to the civilization. The creature to my right was created with a special genetic code. The purpose of this code was to allow it to locate the lost inhabitants with the essential DNA to allow the society to recover and again flourish. Finding you was the first step. At the time of the Great Disaster, your ancestors were in what is currently France. Christian and David's ancestors were in Scotland and England. The creature followed you all for hundreds of years before re-establishing the link, which would allow your families to be reunited. You and Christian will have many children. David will find a wife and fall in love. He and his wife will have children as well. Your children and your children's children will serve to change the world. You will live normal lives. Dr. Manny Noya has served his purpose by facilitating the placement of the crystals and helping us make this connection. He will go on to develop many innovations which will aid all mankind. The U.S. military will continue to guard the location of the diamonds, and the diamonds will continue to provide the link, which is necessary to establish the protective perimeter, which will act as a great wall against evil. As your DNA is passed on to future generations, many things will take place. I will offer you many details which you will remember, but before I do, you must understand that when you return to your life with Christian, David, Christian, Agent MacLeod or Dr. Manny Noya, will have no memory of the events of the past few years. You will return, and they will know you, and Christian will remember only the normal events of your lives. Agent MacLeod will assume that the clandestine operation is a success. Let me caution you about the way the human brain functions. Because humans are hybrids, your mental capacity is limited while you occupy the physical bodies, which are necessary to live on the earth. People will continue to wonder about creation. This is a natural element of humans in their present state of development. They will at least for now continue to use religion to explain the unknown. Understand that the master plan of the Creator, of which you are such a vital part, will continue to progress. Understand that this in no way negates any theology. On the contrary, it will only confirm the truths. As the human race flourishes and benefits from the DNA link, which has been re-established through you and your husband as well as through David and his wife, people will progress from the physical and into the spiritual or virtual world. This will in no way change the earth and its natural inhabitants. They will coexist on different planes of reality. In this dimension, your descendants by virtue of the spread of knowledge through technology will prosper. These are the things which will come to pass. Every generation of humans will possess the inherited ability to interact with computers with ever-increasing ease. By the year 2013, parents will be amazed at the intuition which will be revealed by their children. They will have a natural knowledge of technological devices. Electronic devices will be produced, sold, and bought which have no operation manuals. They will be unnecessary, since everyone will instinctively simply know how they operate. As these devices evolve, so will the human brain. At first, there will be interfaces which require keyboard entry. These will evolve into a series of windows and be controlled by a type of handheld device called a mouse. It is ironic that this name would apply to this device and be shared with the animal which has been used so much in labs because of their rapid generational adaptability. The next stage will be to eliminate the mouse, and touchscreen technology will allow direct contact with the screen. This will be only the beginning. As technology progresses, it will accelerate geometrically. Devices will become smaller and smaller. Touchscreen will give way to implants. These implants will allow our thoughts to be transferred to the computer. All computers will be linked together in the cloud or in the ether. Eventually, because of Dr. Mani Noya's foundation of research in DNA and genetics, a bio-link will be established, which will allow direct wireless connection to the network. Eventually, our natural forms will become less important. An individual can be virtually created and stored in the memory of the cloud. At this point, a true connection between silicon-based and carbon-based life forms will have been established. I am sure by now you are grieving for the loss of humanity. Understand that this is only a perception which you have now. The reality will that be everything humans experience in life, that is good will not change. The perception will be a world with no pain or suffering. There will be only love and happiness. It will be heaven. Epilogue. Jeanette awoke to Christian's voice. Wake up, girl. We got fish to fry. You may have to drive. Come on, let's go see if Miss Hattie wants some. Jeanette said, You are either drunk or crazy. It is 2:00 in the morning. They dropped David off at the Portavine house and Christian said, We are going to rent a movie tomorrow night. Want to come over and watch it with us? David asked, What are you going to watch it on? Christian replied, We got a new VCR. David said, I'll be there. Christian said, Bring some beer. I will cook some steaks. Jeanette smiled and thought about the exciting events soon to come.